right. I want to thank you for joining and welcome to our Inclusive Investment Summit. Our conversation today is grounded in the belief that entrepreneurs are the bedrock of our communities, and investment in entrepreneurs of color will really lead to economic justice and opportunity for everyone. This conversation is particularly timely as we see the increasing number of entrepreneurs of color across the country. There's some recent statistics that show that there are over 8 million businesses owned and operated by entrepreneurs of color, contributing to an economic impact of about $1.4 trillion. That's a lot of money, y'all, and employing about 7 million people. Now, we have to balance that with the reality that we've experienced a lot of devastation as a result of COVID-19. When we look at Black-owned businesses, about 95% of them are sole proprietorships. And when we think about the federal funding that was afforded at the beginning of the pandemic, many sole proprietors were ineligible. Also, as a result of the shelter-in-place requirements, about 41% of Black-owned businesses actually had to shut their doors. So your involvement in today's discussion as aspiring investors, founders, and current investors is really important toward our pathway in terms of economic recovery. We are also in for a treat. And I say we because I am really looking forward to our incredible lineup of speakers that we have for you today. Folks ranging from investors, leaders from national entrepreneurial support organizations, and founders themselves. So before I go any further, though, I want to quickly orient you to the platform. I'll do a much deeper dive after our keynote conversation. But to kick things off, you're currently in the main stage. And so this is where we will convene every morning. This is also where our keynotes will occur. This is also where we will regroup after our breakout sessions. And so you can engage with our speakers in a number of different ways. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see several options in terms of chat, polls, Q&A, and even something called a Wordle. And so the chat is really your way to participate in the conversation. So we won't pose questions there, but if you hear comments from speakers that really resonate with you, one of the norms that we encourage people to do is something called a +1. And so that's just adding emphasis to what you heard. It's almost like a yes in real life, okay? The other thing is feel free to drop an emoji. Maybe it's a heart emoji or a smile, or if you want to grab a quote that resonated with you, feel free to also put that in the chat. And so just to quickly get us comfortable with it, what I'd love for you to do is just share where in the world are you joining from? So I'm currently in New York City, New York. I'd love to see just where people are right now. I know we have a national group and even global. I think we have some global participants. So it'd be good to see what folks, where you are in the world. So feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay. Cool. Just want to take a look at some of the comments. I love that folks are already using that +1 and emoji option. Very good. Very, very good. All right. And so also we'll be capturing some feedback in real time using polls and that Wordle function. So I'll encourage you to do that as well. So now that that's out of the way, let me introduce myself. My name is Matt Williams, and I am one of the co-founders here at Hustle Winston-Salem, headquartered out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I'm honored to serve as your host over the next 2 days. What is so exciting about this opportunity for me is the energy that I get from seeing so many people succeed and encouraging folks to invest in communities of color. Outside of the work that I do with Hustle, I am a leadership trainer and diversity and inclusion researcher for Life Labs Learning, which is the go-to management training company for the tech industry. So we've worked with folks like Warby Parker and Twitter and Google and Facebook, you name it, we've likely worked with them. And so I get a lot of joy and satisfaction from facilitating conversations that help people grow in their leadership and also dismantle barriers um, to inclusion. So, which leads me to my next point, which are essentially our ground rules for engagement. Hustle is a radically inclusive organization, which means that we are intentional about creating spaces that affirm folks from across the identity spectrum. And so we deserve spaces that uplift us in love and support. And so we will not tolerate language that denigrates other people. So no racist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, fatphobic language or behavior will be tolerated. So if we see that, a member of our tech team will remove you. Also, there are several key terms that we will use or share over the course of our conversation today. So I want to just have those pop on the screen so that we all are working from, again, the same understanding. So those are words like diversity, inclusion, equity, and in this case, social equity. We'll also talk about financial equity. Intersectionality, which is a unique term that talks about how aspects of our identity combine to create modes of discrimination and privilege. So, as a person who holds two identities that have been historically marginalized, I identify as Black and also a member of the LGBT community, that can combine to create barriers to access and opportunities in some spaces. Conversely, folks who hold historically dominant identities. So someone who may be able-bodied, male, or white is granted privileges that puts them in spaces or that gives them access to opportunities that may not be afforded to others. So that's what we mean by intersectionality. So we will likely mention that. Also, ESO. And so these are entrepreneurship support organizations that provide a lot of resourcing to help entrepreneurs grow and develop their business. Impact investing, predatory lending, okay? And then non-extractive capital, okay? Those are words that we will see and use over the course of our time today, okay? So with that, what I'd love to do now is just take a pause and I want to hear from you. So I want you to click on that Wordle option and I want you to share with me, what are you most excited to hear about today, right? What are you most excited to hear about or learn about today? I want you to drop that in that Wordle option. Let's see what folks have to say. Give you a couple minutes to respond to that. Yeah, what are you most excited to leave with today? See what folks have to say. Absolutely. Thank you, Joy. We'll drop that in the chat. What are you most excited to leave with today? I see your comment in the chat too, Corey. We are not talking about intersectionality as a way to use it as for your advantage. It's more so giving language to the ways in which folks are impacted by multiple systems of oppression. So that is how it is defined. So, all right, seeing some comments come in. Folks are excited to leave with knowledge. Yeah. New insights, actionable advice, vibes. Yes. Yes to the vibes. Definitely. All right. I love what I'm seeing populated here. Growth, resources, options. Yes to that. Yes to options. And actionable advice. Definitely. I can tell you that with some of the folks who we have lined up, there are resources that you can immediately tap into that will help you advance your business. And so I'll also share a little bit more about what we have included in our platform that could lead to that as well. Yeah. All right. So I want to transition us now into our first speaker of the day. This is our keynote. And so Kasim Rodriguez Mosin will kick us off with the conversation topic, different shades of investment. Is the traditional rinse, scale, repeat model of investing right? Or is this the right way to invest? Or is it the white way to invest? Kasim is an architect of scaling, funding, investment, and acquisitions for high growth businesses. He is the founder and CEO of two investment firms focused on providing entrepreneurial support to social impact ventures and founders from historically marginalized groups. He served as a data scientist for the US Department of Defense and UK Ministry of Defense. He has successfully scaled and supported healthcare products to improve the quality of care in Africa, the US, Canada, the Middle East. He's also convened top farmers and engineers to reduce carbon and water footprint in the agricultural space using the Internet of Things and that technology. He's also visited over 20 countries, was once a traveling musician, is a very talented guitar and harmonica player. So he may grace us with some of his talents a little bit later, but maybe not. But I think this is going to be an incredible conversation. And I'm so looking forward to the things that Qasim has to share with us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. And just let me know in the chat, can they see my screen already? There we go. Hello, world. So we're able to move. Fantastic. All right. Perfect. So thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Matt. I'm so honored to be able to speak with y'all today. Thank you for attending this summit that's focused on inclusive investment. So as noted, my name is Kasim. I'm the founding partner at Equilibrium Impact Ventures. I'm all the things that Matt said. I'm all the things you see here on the screen. I'm a few things you don't see on the screen, but really that's enough about me, because today and tomorrow are about you. And you are a miracle. Statisticians estimate that the odds of you or me being born are about 1 in 400 quadrillion. That's 4,000 trillion. In fact, the most unlikely thing to ever happen to you is probably your birth. And yet, here we all are today. Also consider, kind of embedded into this, the odds for humanity even surviving this long, given the natural food chain and our place in it. I mean, we're pretty slow, we're kind of weak, right? We rely on the land, we can't fly. All of these things don't really play into our favor. And in truth, humans only continue to exist because of our ability to collaborate, because of our collective intelligence, and because of our propensity to build community. And so through innovation and teamwork, we've overcome many of these innate weaknesses to make them strengths. We can not only fly now, but we can fly faster than the speed of sound. We can literally move mountains. We can even leave the planet. And yes, we can all sit together here in this space, even though we might be physically many miles apart. So we have chosen to be here today because we care about inclusion, because we acknowledge that the current state of inequity in our economic system is unacceptable. And we're here because we want to be agents of change, because we believe we can help to create a more equitable society. However, in order to do so, we must first confront and then tear down all of the myths that are holding us back. And myths are powerful things. They exist in our subconscious, they influence our behaviors and our beliefs. But we're going to be doing some myth busting today. And we'll start with the scarcity myth. And this is the idea that there is not enough stuff for everyone. And this myth has ignited greed within our hearts for millennia, and it still governs many of our economic actions to this day. Now, greed certainly has a biological basis tied to our hunting and gathering days. But over time, with the same ingenuity that allowed us to create the spaceship, we turned resource scarcity into a myth. And yet the delusion of greed still remains and drives many of our economic incentives. Consider the following assumptions: that there's not enough food. The world produces enough grain every year to provide every human with 3,500 calories a day. The US wastes 150 billion pounds of food every year. Still, 1 in 6 children in the US will go to bed hungry tonight. What about the idea that there are not enough homes? There are 500,000 individuals experiencing homelessness at any point in time in the US. At the same time, 17 million homes sit vacant. Also consider that in 2021, 1 in 5 residential home purchases was made by a hedge fund. So while we know there is enough to go around, we still behave as if we believe in the myth of scarcity. And perhaps this is because over the same time that we were overcoming scarcity, we also created social constructs around wealth. The greediest humans were rewarded with more and more wealth, which led to greater concentrations of power and influence. And eventually, these groups became the dominant culture. Then they set up systems to control access to currency of all types, both monetary and social. They also created new myths to entrench their control. And that is why it is so important to check our assumptions and to identify the unspoken mythology of our society and our culture. Now, one myth that we tend to subconsciously accept is the myth of meritocracy. The idea that the playing field is level and that everyone advances based on their ability and their merit. But we know this is false because in studying dominant cultures, we understand that the dominant group gets to make the rules. They write the laws, they set the customs, they establish the norms, and they do so to benefit themselves. And we'll dig into this more in a moment. But this includes setting the standards for merit and excellence, even the standards for beauty. And yeah, dominant culture, they get to write the history books. Members of non-dominant groups must conform to the dominant culture in order to gain access to resources. And even when they conform, access isn't always guaranteed. They must follow the law, learn the language, look the part, and behave within the norms. All of this reinforces, benefits, and strengthens the dominant culture. And this leads to inequity, not based on ability or merit, but based on intentional exclusion. Dominant culture can become so powerful that it can be taboo to even challenge the myths or to name them out loud. But we must brave this taboo. Because while uncomfortable, if inclusivity is truly our goal, it's imperative to understand why our systems, particularly our economic systems, have been so historically exclusive in the first place. Like a doctor examining a patient, we have to accurately diagnose the disease, the root cause, before we can begin treatment. And yes, we must do some unlearning. Which brings us to one of the most powerful myths in America, the myth of race. This myth says that we are different from one another based on the color of our skin. Now, to start, this has been thoroughly discredited through genetic testing, which has revealed that nearly everything we believe about race is wrong. Genetically speaking, we are nearly identical to one another across what we call racial lines. The color of our skin, the shapes of our noses and our eyes, All of that was determined through natural selection based on the climate of the land upon which we evolved. But perhaps more compelling than the science is where the concept of race and the idea of white as a race actually came from. Because it was not until the late 1600s, over 100 years after the first slave ships arrived in the colonies, that the idea of white and the idea of race came to be, and only because of political and economic expediency. So during this time, as the amount of work to be done in these growing colonies expanded, the availability of Irish and Scottish servants began to dwindle. This left plantation owners requiring more and more free labor to work the fields. And because plantation owners were so cruel, they also began to fear an uprising from both slaves and servants alike, especially after Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, which saw Europeans and Africans band together against the colony of Virginia. The colonizers definitely understood the power of community. In the 1690s, as part of the reaction to Bacon's Rebellion, and as a way to preserve the power of the colony, Virginia passed a series of laws to enshrine the institution of chattel slavery, to stave off future rebellion, to scale the transatlantic slave trade, and to acquire more labor. This legislation created a new class of person called white, with special privileges and rights. For example, white people, even if they were enslaved, could one day work to become free. Those who were not white, however, could never become free and were now considered hereditary slaves by law. One law, entitled An Act for Suppressing Outlying Slaves, contains the first known legal usage of the words white person, and it created law enforcement to chase down runaway slaves, a precursor to our modern day police. It also declared that any white person who married a non-white person would be banished from the colony. So in other words, what we think of as race is a purely political construct that was solely created to justify racially based slavery and to maintain a rift between communities of people based on skin color. It's called divide and conquer. This powerful myth of race, when established in a burgeoning nation, simultaneously institutionalized white supremacy into the fabric of every system in America through legal decree. By 1776, white supremacy had taken a strong foothold in the British colonies. About 20% of the population were African slaves when the United States was founded. This nation was created directly on top of over 600 existing indigenous nations. Manifest destiny drove the extending of this new nation's borders from sea to shining sea on the backs of slaves and servants. This went on for 3 centuries, and it established the infrastructure needed for this new dominant group called white people to concentrate immense amounts of power and wealth, while excluding almost everyone else from those same opportunities. In this nation, racialized chattel slavery was the law of the land until 1865. And immediately following emancipation, many states enacted Jim Crow laws, re-enshrining a continuation of white supremacy for another 100 years. This discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin was legal until 1964. Every incremental step toward progress has taken decades and centuries to achieve. Anyone with a shred of intellectual honesty would acknowledge that this level of long-term systemic oppression of a people would create generations of economic and social disparity. And while this is Black History Month, this is not Black history. This is American history. It is European history, and it is the history of colonization. But it's also our current reality. Since the election of Barack Obama, 25 states have passed laws making it harder for Black, brown, and poor people to vote. We all remember what we saw on January 6th. We can see them burning books, and we are watching legislators pass laws to prevent American children from learning the history that I just presented. We are still fighting the shadows of colonialism. They will not go gently into the night. But in case this may all seem overwhelming, there is another great myth at play here. And that is the myth that we are powerless to enact change, when we as a species have literally been to the moon and back. We can accomplish whatever we put the power of community behind. The tools of our trade are innovation and revolution. The situation we find ourselves in today truly calls for both, and more on this later. But first, let's look our current problem in the face, because this is the economic reality that the myth of race has created. I believe we are all at this summit today because we understand that the fastest way to close these economic gaps and alter our trajectory is to fundamentally change how we think about investing. The world of investment, in particular private equity and venture capital, has created enormous amounts of wealth while remaining especially exclusive by design, out in the open, and as a brand. And here's how much venture funding has gone to Black and Hispanic founders over the last several years in the US. Do you notice anything? While the sheer amount of money going into venture funding has skyrocketed, Black and brown founders have remained stuck at about 2% or less of the total funding pie. This is the problem we need to solve as a community. And we need to dig under this problem to uncover the myths that have been holding us back, because these numbers have not budged. So let's bust some myths. Let's first ask, why does so little funding go to Black and brown founders? Well, one possible assumption is that there just aren't any qualified Black and brown founders to invest in. However, a review of pipeline data done by the Kauffman Foundation shows that since 1980, Black and Hispanic people have been graduating with advanced degrees at an accelerating rate, while the rate of college-educated whites has actually dropped. However, this is not directly translated to either jobs in tech or in startup leadership. The entrepreneurship rates of Hispanic people have outpaced everyone else by leaps and bounds, yet they continue to get less than 2% of all investments. So why is it so incredibly difficult for Black and brown founders to secure investment? And why isn't the increase in pipeline converting to increased entrepreneurship or funding opportunities? Where's the disconnect here? Well, one insightful way to examine this question is to ask, well, how do investors source their deals? And in what may seem ironic in a moment, Harvard conducted an in-depth analysis of 900 venture capital investors to ask them, how do you source your deals? And here are the results. 30% of deals come from former colleagues. 20% of them come from other investors, other VCs. About 10% are referrals from their existing portfolio companies, the companies that they invest in. And then 30% are outbound searches. So the investors go out and find businesses to invest in, and they usually go to the same places, accelerators, pitch competitions, and investors can only go to the communities that they know and understand. And sometimes they can only work regionally. But only 10% of deals happen because of a cold email or something coming inbound. This means that 90% of deals actually come from inside existing investor networks and as far as they can reach out their arms and touch. Even if you get a chance to pitch a VC, only 1 out of every 101 companies that a VC reviews will actually end up with an investment. So these are pretty long odds. And it looks like being in network is pretty important. So the next logical question would be, well, what do those networks look like? And by the numbers, 95% of VCs are either white or Asian, and 78% are male. So if a VC is sourcing a deal from another VC or a former colleague, there's an overwhelming likelihood that both VCs in the conversation are males, and a very good chance that they are both white males. If you look at money under management, the disparity becomes absolutely one-sided. White males control 93% of all of the money currently sitting in VC funds. Well, okay, so what about the other sources of deals? What about, let's say, people they went to school with? And if a VC is sourcing a deal from a former classmate, there's an overwhelming likelihood that both VCs went to Stanford or Harvard or another Ivy League school. Working VCs who go back to school overwhelmingly go to the same schools that feed the pipeline. This is critically important because these pipelines are also designed to be exclusive. And they are obviously creating a highly inequitable funding landscape based on the data. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's just take a look at Harvard, which is often cited as the birthplace of venture capital. And there are many myths to be unpacked here, because this is why Harvard is considered exclusive. And these points are indicative of many of the schools on the VC pipeline. Firstly, Harvard operated as a prestigious institution of higher learning for 233 years before having a Black graduate, and 284 years before admitting its first woman student. Secondly, this year's incoming class had an admissions rate of 3.9%, the lowest in the school's history, and tied with Stanford for the lowest in the country. And third, the cost of attendance. Look at those numbers. These costs ensure that a bulk of the student body is coming from wealth. And here's where we start to uncover some myths. Because to many, perhaps to most, Harvard is believed to be exclusive because they only accept the best. With a 3.9% admission rate, they only accept the best, right? And with that price tag, only the best, right? Remember the myth of meritocracy? Now, because Harvard is a private university, they do not have to disclose their admissions process. However, over the past few years, Harvard has been embroiled in legal battles about how race plays a role in how they decide which students to accept and which to deny. In fact, this case will be heard by the Supreme Court in October of this year, along with a similar case against the University of North Carolina. Now, we're not going to argue the merits of this case today, but I do want to present some information that was released into the public record by the court as part of the legal process of discovery. And this information speaks to the myth of meritocracy. And it allows us to take a very rare peek into an internal process called legacy admissions. Now, legacy admissions exist at many exclusive universities, most of the Ivy League, so this is not particular to Harvard. But what is so compelling here is that without the recent lawsuits, we would not have access to this information at all. So what are legacy admissions anyway? Well, it's basically a way for some students to cut in line and get preferential treatment during the admissions process. At Harvard, these students fall into 4 categories. The first are recruited athletes, and these make up less than 1% of total applications, but legacy athletes make up 10% of the student body. And at Harvard, these athletes are majority white, and they have an admission rate of nearly 100%. The second group are the Dean's Interest List. These are students whose families have donated to the school above a certain amount. Those who tend to give and give often can land their kids on this list. These students have a 42% admissions rate. Remember that the most recent general admission rate was 3.9%. So this means if your family donated to Harvard early and often, that you would be 7 to 8 times more likely to be admitted. The third group are students whose parents are faculty members. These students have a 47% admissions rate. And the last group are students whose parents are alumni. And these students have a 34% admissions rate. Now, demographically, 71% of all of these legacy applicants are white. And with the higher acceptance rates for legacy application, it actually turns out that 43% of all white students at Harvard are in fact legacy students. And perhaps that's not surprising, but here's the kicker. Based on Harvard's own application scores, 75% of white students admitted through legacy admissions did not meet admission standards. Okay, so let's visualize this because this helps me put things into perspective. If the 100 icons on the left represent 100% of white students at Harvard, then 43 of them, those 43 in the middle, would be legacy students. Of those 43, about 32 of them, 75% of 43, do not meet admissions criteria. This means that 32%, or 1 in 3, of all white students at Harvard got into the school without meeting the criteria that was required of others. Every argument against affirmative action cites a scenario such as this: a large percentage of below standard people taking the place of those who deserve it more. If we apply this percentage to the incoming class using the demographics supplied by Harvard on their website, that would equate to 415 students. Think about the 3.9% admissions rate for everyone else. Who might have gotten excluded in this scenario? Now, let me be clear, because almost every major private university has legacy admissions. And in 2019, a scandal rocked the news and implicated Stanford, Yale, Georgetown, and several other elite universities, along with some Hollywood actors. This has been going on for a long time in secret, and it will continue to go on until universities put a stop to it. So let's bust this myth right now. Graduates from these exclusive universities are no smarter, are no more effective, are no better qualified than graduates with similar degrees from schools like Michigan State or Ohio State or Florida A&M or Queen's University. Yet these pipelines of opportunity, the exclusive ones, the ones many call elite, and the ones that run directly into venture capital are working to keep one group of individuals in the system while keeping other groups out. And as a result, the outputs from these pipelines are still overwhelmingly white and male. It is the myth of race balanced upon the myth of meritocracy. Exclusive is the VC brand. It has always been a feature and not a bug, a source of pride and not shame. And that is what makes inclusive investment such a groundbreaking concept. But executing it doesn't require groundbreaking ideas necessarily. Remember, you are not powerless. That is a myth. In fact, with this knowledge, there are some simple policy and procedure changes that can make outsized differences. If you're a person of influence in investment, private equity, venture capital, if you are an employer in these spaces, if you are in higher education, you can work to bust these myths. For example, your firm can begin to do blind interviews. This will eliminate the bias towards certain schools and certain employers. Funds can begin to eliminate warm intros. There's a growing movement for this. Perhaps every submission to your fund can go through a front door application process, and every application for funding can get some consideration by the fund. Yeah, this is slow, but it's so much more fair. And then lastly, of course, universities can just eliminate legacy admissions. Studies have shown that this would increase equity in universities across the country. Or maybe you do have a groundbreaking idea, because we need those too. In fact, we have every right to challenge the existing ideas of what investment can and should look like as we tear down these myths and build new ideas in their ashes. For example, at my firm, Equilibrium Impact Ventures, we have intentionally built our thesis around creating equity in our investments. We've done this through creating a diverse general partner team. We do it by allotting at least 2/3 of our funding to Black, Brown, and women founders. We do it by supporting and investing into new networks and pipelines. And we do it by directly funding companies that are solving for these equity gaps. And these are not just the right things to do, we also know that it's good business. So we all understand the power of community, and we've seen how critical it is to have access to VC networks. So our goal should be to expand these networks to be more inclusive of everyone. This summit is a great example of an opportunity to start building those connections. Investors must work to find new partners, including nonprofits doing the work of equity and universities outside of the Ivy League, especially HBCUs. However, we cannot gloss over the centuries of myth reaffirmation and systemic oppression. Indeed, this network expansion will take trust. And trust is a loaded word. So I will leave you with some wisdom from Brené Brown based on her extensive research into trust. So first, let's define trust. And we can define it as choosing to make something that's important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. Inclusion and equity is important to all of us. And in order to work with each other to build a better world, we will have to put ourselves in places of vulnerability. Now, because the word trust is so loaded, it helps to break it down into 7 components. And I believe these principles can be impactful for us to take into the summit and beyond as we seek to build trust and vulnerability with one another. And these components use the acronym BRAVING, because when we are vulnerable, we are also being brave. So let's make these commitments to one another as we start to build connection. The first one is boundaries. We must set boundaries, we must hold them, and we must respect them. If you're an investor or an organization looking to join this movement, seek out those who are already doing the work. Understand their boundaries and don't cross them. If you're an organization doing this work, set your boundaries and communicate them clearly. Secondly, trust requires reliability. This means that you do what you say you will do over and over and over again, because we can't trust one another if we do not follow through on our commitments. If you say you're going to write a check, then you better write a check. Third, accountability. This means that we own our mistakes, we apologize, and we work to make amends. Nobody is perfect. So giving one another and ourselves grace to mess up and then make it right is critical. V is for vault. And this means that whatever we share with one another in these spaces, we will hold in confidence. It means we will continuously demonstrate a commitment to confidentiality. It means we won't share stories that aren't ours to share. And it means we won't gossip. I is for integrity, which is so important in this work. Integrity means choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy. It means practicing our values, not just professing them. And especially if you're in a place of privilege, you must be courageous to break down the myths and to speak truth to power in your spheres of influence. This is called being an ally. N is for non-judgment. And this means that I can ask for what I need and you can ask for what you need without either of us judging one another. It means we can talk about how we feel without judgment. It means we will ask for help, and it means that we will help one another. Asking for help is a sign of strength and not weakness. And then finally, generosity. And this is not just generosity with your money and your time. It also includes extending the most generous interpretation to the intentions, the words, and the actions of others. We cannot build trust if we are constantly assuming the worst of one another. If we do all of these things, all of them together, we will expand the inclusiveness of our networks on a strong foundation of trust. As a result, we will spark both innovation through new ideas and revolution through defeating these myths. And my friends, innovation and revolution are truly the only 2 things that have ever rapidly changed the human experience for the better. Please enjoy the rest of the summit. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or any other social platforms to continue the conversation. May you all be well, happy, and peaceful. Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Qasim. That was so amazing. It was awesome. So definitely in line with your namesake. And we are so thrilled to have had you share your expertise with us. Now, I do want to maybe open the floor for some comments or questions if folks have them. Feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll give Qasim an opportunity to respond. Oh, sorry. We're actually going to hold on the Q&A. We're going to hold on the Q&A, but feel free to connect with Qasim during the networking portions of the summit today. So we're going to keep it moving forward. Thank you so much. This is our opportunity to pause for a bit and just let what was shared completely wash over you. I'm still stewing in some of the things that Qasim mentioned. And so just a couple of things to orient us even more to the day and the platform. So Hop In is a great tool for us to connect with one another. When it comes to joining the breakout sessions, which will be next, feel free to click on the sessions button of the platform, and that will pull up several different breakout groups. So you select the one that you would like to participate in. The other option for you too is networking. And so that's a space where you can set up some one-on-one engagements with different participants in the summit, have conversations with one another, share your contact information and resources. The expo is also a really unique feature of the platform. And what we've done there is actually invited vendors and entrepreneurial support organizations to share resources, videos, and materials that will help you in developing your business and connecting with investors. So I encourage you to spend some time there and again, get to know some of the people through their work and the things that they provided.
Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. This is Black Angels, How and Why You Should Invest. So if you just got all fired up by my good friend Qasim's speech, then you should be here and you should be ready to jump in and change the narrative. So first things first, I always like to introduce myself because it's necessary to know why the heck you should care about what I'm talking about. I never like taking advice from people that I don't know. So I'm Dr. Shantae, and I am an angel investor. I'm a private investor. I'm the CEO of Black Pearl Global Investments. I'm also a partner in Equilibrium Impact Ventures, which is doing all of that wonderful work that Qasim's talking about. But before I got pulled into the VC space, I got my start specifically as an angel investor. I'm also the author of a couple of books. One is called Black Angels, Black Angels Among Us. And I'm going to start this conversation not with investing, but I'm going to talk about something that we never really talk about out loud, and that's gentrification. But why gentrification is our problem, and not our problem in that people are coming into our neighborhoods. It's actually the opposite problem. It's a problem we created. So I don't know if you guys are like me. I grew up in a lower income neighborhood, and as soon as my parents got money, where did they go? To the burbs. And, you know, they got the heck out of Dodge really quickly. And that was the dream, right? As soon as we get some money, we're going somewhere else. We're not going to invest in our community. We're going to leave it. And what happens in a vacuum? Other people come in. So I like to always start angel investing conversations by saying, people cannot gentrify your neighborhood if you don't give them space to move into it. And that's where angel investing really comes into play here. So stay with me and stick with this topic just a little bit because it hurts a little bit at first, but I promise you'll agree with me in the end. So when we think about our neighborhoods, and a lot of people say, well, why would I want to stay in a place where there's no value? I can promise you as an investor, no one puts money into a space where there's no value. No one comes in and buys property in a space where there's no value. No one comes into an area and says, you know what, I'm just going to sink a bunch of money here because there's no value. No, we've got to, first of all, retune our minds. And when we think about angel investing, that's what we're able to do, is really retool our minds and how we look at and assess value. Now, one of the myths that Qasim talked about in his speech was powerlessness. I personally believe that angel investing actually gives us the power back to talk about some of those things that we don't get to talk about, or the conversations we don't get to join in, like VC, right? If we're angel investors, then we are the deployers of the capital. If we're talking about gentrification, we're the people that own the properties. If we're talking about education or politics, we can change the conversation by becoming angel investors. So powerlessness is something that we are not, because we all have checks. Two things that our community has in spades. One is talent. The other is a sense of community. And I have the pleasure of talking to startups and founders all over the world all the time. And inherent in our startups is this impact notion. It's this community notion. I've never actually met a founder of color who wasn't building something that would have an impact on their community. And I think that's a powerful thing. And I think the way that we can actually support them is by angel investing. So I told you that we aren't powerless, but why aren't we powerless? Well, it's because angel investing actually doesn't take as much as you might think when compared to venture capital. So I'll start with some data. So only 1.3% of all angel investors are Black. That's actually less than the 3% that's actually in venture capital. Now, why does that matter? Where do angels come in? Angels come in very, very, very early on in the life cycle of a business or a startup. And angel money, if it's patient and if it is sufficient, it's able to help a company, a founder, a startup get through what some people call the valley of death, but it helps them to get that early traction. It also helps them to fend off all of the vultures. Now, one of the things that I see time and time again with startups and small businesses, so I'm going to talk about two different groups here: startups, high growth, high tech kind of things that might go after venture capital, but I'm also going to talk about community or Main Street businesses that are, those anchors in our communities. Both of them need money. Okay, so if we are able to support those businesses early on, guess what they don't have to take? Predatory money. And why would they be preyed to money? If they're smart enough, right? If they're good business owners, they won't need that. Well, statistics show that Black business owners or people of color are less likely to actually get a business bank loan. And if they do get the loan, they're going to get less than they asked for. So commercial lending probably, or small business banking really isn't going to be something that's available to them. Especially if it's heavily reliant on credit. And if you're an entrepreneur, like I was an entrepreneur, your credit might be shot to shingles for at least a little while. So that's not going to be an option for them. That puts them into the secondary market. If they have to go to the secondary market, that cost of capital is extremely high. I'll give you a first example of a company that I had the pleasure of working with. And this company was able to get started. They started generating money. They got to generating about $1 million, and they needed somewhere around $250,000 in order to get to the next level. That $250,000 they could not get from their bank. They were over leveraged. That $250,000, they didn't know any angels. They didn't know any private investors. So they found someone who would give them $250,000. They wrote them that check. And then what happened? They started making payments. Now, they didn't read the fine print on this particular loan. And after 5 years, they still owed $250,000, even though they paid more than $1 million. Why? Because they had to go to the secondary market, and the loan that they had to take out from this private investor only paid off the interest, and they would have to pay the interest plus the principal, and all of this unpaid principal had compounding interest on top of it. So they were just in a mountain of debt. So they came to my firm and they said, can you help us get out of this? And of course, we worked very hard to get them out of that capital situation. That happens time and time and time again. So that's part of the why. We shouldn't be sending our businesses to this secondary market. We should not allow them to be prey. The other why that I think is much more important is, if we want to control the conversations, we've got to control the currency. And that is the bottom line for all of what we're talking about throughout this entire conference. Controlling the conversation, meaning if we want to see more impactful startups make it, we've got to put the money towards it. If we want to see more founders of color moving forward, we've got to put the money behind them. Well, Dr. Shante, I'm not a millionaire, right? So you're not a millionaire. I wasn't a millionaire when I made my first investment. My first investment actually came in the form of something that wasn't super sexy. It wasn't super high tech. It was something I knew. It was hair, right? It was my hair salon. So I came in thinking, okay, I love my hairstylist. I love those products that she's putting forth. And why not? Why is she not selling these products? Because I can't find the products she uses in my hair. So I asked her a very, very simple question. And I said to her, well, I want to buy your products and, keep me coming back, and generate other revenue for you. Why aren't you selling them? And she simply said, I don't have enough capital in order to buy the products and then use them on the client. So what I buy, I have to use. I don't have a surplus to sell. So my very first angel investment was to a Main Street business. I wrote her $1,000 check, $1,000. And that $1,000 helped her to buy products. Those products went on the shelf. The products on that shelf sold very, very quickly. She re-upped time and time again. After about a year and a half, she had more than returned the loan or the investment plus margin. And she said, well, can we do this a couple more times? Can we increase this investment? Of course we can. I'm an investor. I want to make money on my investment. And she saw this as a method to generate extra revenue into her firm, into her business, but she saw it as a leg up. So she ended up not only just having an extra revenue stream, she hired 2 employees. That's 2 other incomes that's going into our community, creating economic mobility. On top of that, she said, you know what, this is really working well. I wonder if we can open a second salon. So she opened a second salon. And from that, we're now more than 10 years beyond that first investment. And that first investment has actually helped her to move completely from behind the chair. And she now is a national director for a hair startup that is growing by leaps and bounds. Now, why is that story significant to you other than, it's a great story about how you can take a little money? It's significant because it shows the power of community. Our community has a lot of talent. It does not necessarily have a lot of capital currently, but collectively we can pool our monies together. So we talked about angel investing just a little bit, and we'll talk about angel investing in the terms of what can we do with our little dollars? How do I get started? I encourage everybody to do what I call a financial fast. Your financial fast is literally saying, where does all my money go? And yes, I am talking to myself a lot of times and saying, my money needs to go, to bills. And then I've got, frivolous things that I spend money on, but I need to know where my money's going. That's how you start to see whether or not you have any extra capital to put anywhere. Make sure you have your savings, and then you go from there. But when you start looking at how much you might want to, start investing, I want to have $1,000. Maybe $1,000 isn't enough for what you want to do or the types of businesses you want to invest in. You might also have 10 friends that have $1,000. I worked with a small group of women who came together after seeing a couple of workshops that I had done. And they said, you know what, I've got $1,000 and I've got $1,000. And soon they had $10,000. And this group of Black women said, together, we're going to come together to invest in a Black woman-owned startup. So they provided early capital into a Black woman-owned business in order to help that business grow. That's the power of community. None of them took an exorbitant amount of risk. None of them, are out there speculating, and none of them actually had the expectation of walking away becoming a multi-billionaire on their $1,000 investment, but they got their feet wet. See, I've got a question in the chat here. It says, what's the difference between giving money and investing? Oh, well, there's a huge difference. If you give your money away, that's philanthropy. Philanthropy means you're giving it and you don't expect to make any money on it. You are putting it out there to do good, and that's great, but you are not respecting any type of financial return. The type of return you might get is, societal good, impact related. It might even be feel good to you, but it absolutely is not going to be financially returned back to you. So that's giving money away, or philanthropy. Investing your money means that you are putting your money into something with the expectation that it's going to return your principal plus something else. And the principal is the amount of money by which you put into the investment in the first place. Now, on that note, There are lots of types of investments. You can make an investment that looks like debt, which means that, I lent somebody some money and they made a payment to me over time. And when I add all those payments back up together, I got my money back plus some margin on top of that. That's an investment that has a return, but that's a classic debt vehicle. Now that's going to look like the typical loans that we already know how to do. If we're talking about investment more aligned with startups or small businesses, then you may be putting that money in and waiting for a period of time. It could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, it could be 3 years, depending on the type of business you're investing in. But you have put your money in there, you're waiting a period of time, and you're expecting a return to come back to you. And that return, if you are going to be a VC investor, is going to be completely outsized. If you're an angel investor and you're very early in and you're investing in something that's going to be a high growth business, then you're going to be expecting a really, you're early in, you may be expecting quite a big return. You probably won't get rich as an angel investor unless you have done it lots and lots and lots of times. You're pretty diversified and you've been able to invest larger sums of money. So if you are investing $1,000, I don't want you to walk away thinking, Dr. Shante told me I invested $1,000 and I'm going to make $1 million next year. That's not likely to happen. A couple of other points that I do want to pull out while we're talking about angel investing. We talked about a little bit of the how. I started with understanding what you're working with as far as capital goes. Okay, you might say, okay, I've done my financial fast. I know where my money's going, and I've got a little extra money. Let's say, all in all, after doing this assessment, I've got $2,000 a month that I could pull to the side. What do you do with that $2,000? Now, you could, go out and find some business to put that $2,000 in, but most people are probably going to do something a bit different. They may go to the internet and they may go to a crowd equity fund or a crowd investing platform that's going to allow them to take a small equity stake in a company, similar to how I described my first investment, but this is a company that could be a high growth business. It could be some business that's, across the country. It could be across the world. Crowd equity allows you to put small amounts of money into businesses, and it grows over time. The beauty of crowdfunding or crowd equity is you don't have to worry about necessarily being an accredited investor, which is a barrier that keeps a lot of smaller investors and people of color out, because it means that you have at least $1 million of net worth, or you are a high earner. And a lot of people haven't gotten to that level yet, and that keeps them out of those high growth opportunities. So you want to absolutely look at some of these opportunities in a couple of ways. Think about your risk tolerance. You want to think, am I someone who really loves things that are highly speculative, and I'm all in on things that are super, super new and I'm willing to take a chance? Or am I someone who might be more conservative? I want to invest, but I want to invest in something I know. I've made investments into things like a catering company on one of the platforms. I see a couple of places that you can go. Cosm has dropped them in. WeFunder, Republic. I like Mainvest. Mainvest is actually a crowd equity platform that allows you to invest in Main Street businesses. I will also give you a couple of pointers on crowdfunding. There are several types of crowdfunding. So don't confuse crowd equity platforms with those crowdfund platforms that are going to give you like t-shirts. Those are excellent ways to get capital into businesses, but you are not expecting a return there. You're not expecting a financial return. You are, putting monies in, you are helping them get started, but you absolutely aren't going to see any type of financials, anything down the line. So if you get onto a platform and, someone has a great idea and they say, oh, this level gives you, a t-shirt and da, 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 da. then that's a different type of crowdfunding model. It is not necessarily investing. It's akin, someone said giving away money. I don't know that it's giving away money. It's an investment that doesn't have a financial return that's tied to it. A few other things that I'd like us to really consider as we think about our currency, our capital, our communities. I want us to really start to think about the missions and the things that we hold dear. We talk about holding the boundaries and holding our values in our community, and our capital determines that. Where we spend our money, how we spend our money, what we invest in absolutely determines that. There was a headline about a couple of weeks ago that said Black spending power hit an all-time high. However, our net worth declined. That means we spent money, but we didn't actually grow our base. And that is a troubling sign. It's a troubling sign because that means that we may be spending on things that aren't retaining their value. Angel investing is a mechanism by which we can retain more of our net worth. That means we might become angel investors by collectively owning property. We could become angel investors by investing in businesses. We could become angel investors by supporting a specific startup, or we may even find a specific fund that allows for smaller checks from individuals, where we can write a check into a venture fund as an individual and be an investor in that way. I will say all of that to say, there's a phrase that I've just fallen in love with. Our mission should not be divorced from economic value. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that if we want to change all of these statistics that we see, Black businesses underfunded, people of color getting overlooked, the amount of funding from VC not staying stagnant, not going up. We have lots and lots of new fund managers of color. However, it's taking them twice as long to raise the capital, and they are raising a fund that's about half the size of their counterparts, which means we can't rely on the venture capital space exclusively to push things forward. We really need to think about how we as individuals are going to take charge of this conversation. And the way we do that, in my opinion, is by getting off the sidelines and becoming investors, writing checks directly into our communities. My advice to anyone who is even the least bit curious about angel investing or starting to write checks within their community really is to come into the conversation and start looking at the local businesses around you. You might ask, well, how do I find a business in my community that I might want to invest in? Well, think about the businesses that you frequent a lot. I tell people, we always have that favorite spot that we complain about, right? Like, oh, I want to go there, but it takes so long to get food, or oh, I want to go there, but they never have the stuff I want. That might be an opportunity. We have to stop looking at those inconveniences as barriers for us to support and say, okay, maybe my support needs to look like an investment in. Now, please remember, taking on an angel investment into your personal finances, you need a lawyer. You do need to have an attorney. You do need to have, you need to understand the implications for your finances. So please talk to an accountant. It's not a DIY situation unless you're going to go with an established platform, and then they're going to generate those tax forms for you. If you're going to source your own deals or go out and find businesses for you to invest in, make sure you have a team. If you don't have a team, it's okay, but you do need to ask questions. You need to ask a lot of questions. You don't want to write yourself or paint yourself into a corner. You don't want to lose your money. On that note, setting expectations is the last thing that I'll say here. Angel investing is an excellent way to support our community. It's an excellent way in order to get more businesses, getting that early traction, some customer discovery, that prototyping, just giving them what I like to call financial faith, showing them that there is community support. Angel investing is not charity, so you're going to need to choose good opportunities. You're not just giving it to anyone that you happen to like. It needs to have some actual economic viability and some business viability. But you want to make sure that early on you're saying, okay, good opportunity, plus I'm well prepared to wait, because you can't put pressure on an early business. You don't want to say, okay, I'm going to give you this money and in 60 days I need my money back. That's not how angel investing works. If you're an angel, you probably need to be what we would call patient capital. And patient capital is really that type of capital that's going to wait it out. It's going to be there for the long haul. It's going to be there over time and saying, okay, I'm here with you, growing and growing and growing, and hopefully you see an exit or a return on your funds at some point. I will say my earliest true investment that was equity specific was a 5-year wait. So rule of thumb, expect to wait. Expect it to be a slow jog for most investments, and then don't expect, a 1,000-fold return. Depending on how much money you put in, the return could be nice. It may not be life-changing, but I like to think of angel investments as me doing my part to push businesses forward. See a couple of other questions here. With crowdfunding with equity, does the group have voting rights? I will say, for the most part, I don't think so. The few platforms that I have been on, there is not a voting right. Now, that might be dependent upon how much you put into the opportunity. I haven't seen that. Usually, what I've seen is, you can invest as little as $50 all the way up to, $10,000 or $50,000. And depending on the investment level, there may be additional rights granted at a specific level. So it may vary depending on what type of platform and the opportunity as it's laid out. Does giving or investing always need to be with the intent of getting a return? No. Investing, in my opinion, is about return. The type of return you're looking for could be balanced. There are lots of social investors or social impact investors that are looking to balance impact, meaning I'm doing societal good, or I'm doing, growing, food, or I'm solving a problem, or I'm achieving a mission, or decreasing inequity. Plus, I might make a return, and sometimes that social return might be more than the financial return. Sometimes the financial return might be greater than the social return. It doesn't have to be financial. I would encourage you, though, to look at your investments as some balance of both. And it may be a pendulum. It could be, 60-40 on one side, 70-30 on the other. This is a personal decision for me. I like to be charitable where I want to be charitable. And if I'm going to give away money, that's philanthropy. I don't call that investing at all. I do plan to do good. I know there is a return, but if I want pure social return or pure feel good, or, get all the good feels, that's going to be in a completely separate bucket. I don't consider that a part of my angel investing activities, because that's not going to increase my bottom line. And because I'm an investor and that's how I make my money, I do invest with the intent on getting a return. So I would encourage us all to have a balance between impact and financial return. I, for one, don't think you have to sacrifice one for the other. I think you can do good and you can make money. I don't think you have to say, okay, well, I put in a lot of money, so I will just expect, I'll take any collateral harm that comes. I don't think that has to be the case, just like I don't think if you're going to do good, you don't have to get it, you won't get any monies back. So, think about as you go forward and you decide to get off the investing line, not the charity line, getting off the sidelines and getting into the game and investing, think about it with some intention of activating your money, because activated money compounds. Activating money creates opportunities. Activated money is able to create economic mobility. Activated money is able to push the community forward. It's able to change the narrative. Activated money can change the world. And I love just the metaphor of angels, and angels are here to save the day. And I encourage all of us brown people, all of us Black people, to become the angels of our communities and lift those businesses up. I don't know if we have time for one more question. I think we're good to go here. Oh, I've got 5 more minutes. Well, any parting thoughts? I will just say to you, my imperative to especially my Black women investors, I've adopted what I call, I'm the Black lady that invests. While we see very small numbers of Black people in the angel investing space, we see even fewer women, and women seem to be very reticent to become investors. This is usually because we want to know everything about everything and be completely sure that we aren't missing something, and we want a sure thing. Investing, there are no sure things. That's a big red flag. If you see someone saying, oh, this is a guaranteed return, that's not going to happen. So don't fall for that. But my imperative to women in particular, a lot of women of color end up head of household, or they may end up the breadwinners because they are getting these degrees and they have these high flying jobs. We need to become check writers. Black women, even at this point, are starting businesses at a very high rate and receiving such tiny amounts of investment, and we really need to move things forward. I say, if we use one of the platforms listed above, will those platforms automatically provide tax forms so we won't need to get an attorney advice on it? I can see that being a barrier. I actually do get tax forms from the opportunities that I have written checks into. So the tax form itself isn't the barrier. However, I will say you need to know what to do with the tax form. So if you're going to start dabbling in the angel investing or investing space writ large, you probably want to start having someone else prepare your taxes. And you want to get advice early on about how to claim income, whether you do that through a separate entity, whether you do that as personal investment. You want to get some CPA guidance on that so that you know what to do with the tax forms that you get. I wouldn't TurboTax it if you're someone who does your own taxes. Hi, Gloria. It's good to see you here. But yes, my passion is Black women. I'm a Black woman investor, and ultimately, all women actually are reticent to jump in. Black women, can really be a catalyst. I hate to use the terminology superwoman because we're not superheroes, but we have had to wear the capes. And I think sometimes it's apt that we save ourselves. So we can put our financial capes on and write checks and save our businesses, save our own businesses, and start writing and investing. And, all of my talk, I hope that you walk away thinking 2 things. 1, you absolutely can do this and you can get started. And then 2, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to invest alone. You don't have to invest by yourself. You absolutely can and should work with a group. Find your tribe. Everybody has an investing tribe, a group of people who absolutely want to do the same things that you do, who are on the same mission, who live in your community, who want to see the same change. So find your investing tribe. I'm happy to help you find your investing tribe at the end of the day. So please feel free to connect with me on any of the social platforms. Anybody who see me speak before knows that I say I'm in these internet streets. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm Dr. Shantae. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Dr. Shantae Williams. You can find me on Instagram. I'm Dr._Shantae. I'm on Facebook. I'm literally everywhere. And if you want to ask me a direct question, you can go to my website. It's Dr. spelled out DOCTOR Shantae SHANTE.com. And Dr. Shantae, if you look up Dr. DOCTOR_SHANTE, you should find me on Facebook. Or if you want to send me a direct email, send it to ask at Dr. DOCTOR Shantae SHANTE.com. So I look forward to connecting with you. Danette, I hope you find me on Facebook, or I will try to look for you. Twitter again, Dr. Shantae. They're all the same handle. Should be DOCTOR_Shantae on Twitter as well. So I tried to keep it simple because I can't remember many things other than the investing stuff. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all Dr. Shantae. My website, drshantae.com, all spelled out DOCTOR. And LinkedIn, you will find me, I think, Dr. Shantae MBA, if you're looking for me on LinkedIn.
Welcome to the F word, understanding the language of business session. So thank you all for joining into this session. I do think that this is a very important topic for a lot of businesses. And right now, what we are definitely seeing a lot of is that more and more people are really finding themselves having some very important conversations about business. But one of the challenges that a lot of people tend to run into is in some of those conversations, they don't quite feel like they are prepared for those conversations because there's certain words that are being used. There are certain topics that are being brought up that they don't always feel like they really have a good handle on what those topics are, or even how to answer some questions as certain terms are being used. But one of the very important things about, the journey of any business owner, if you're looking to really raise capital for your business, so you're looking to attract different investors, one of the most important things is that you are able to reach a level of understanding with the person that you are speaking with. And when it comes down to reaching a common level of understanding, a lot of it has to do with the language that you use. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to communicate the wrong message by using words in ways that don't connect with the audience, or whether the audience or the potential investors that you're speaking to, whether they are using words that you don't understand, that you don't connect with. So in this session, because I'm actually doing 2 sessions for this conference, today we're really going to talk a lot about some key terms and things that you need to understand. Tomorrow, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into actually how you tell the story. Now, in order to be able to share and tell a good financial story, because the financial story makes all of the difference. I mean, from whether or not you can attract and hold the attention of someone who has interest in your business. And so today we're going to talk about some key terms that you'll need to know to be able to tell a really good story. But before we jump into that, to give you a little bit of context on myself, my background is accounting and finance. And I went to school, undergrad at a small school called Lander University in South Carolina. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Notre Dame to get a master's degree in accounting. And in the process of doing that, there was a lot of things that I came face to face with realizing is that finance was not in accounting. It wasn't a topic that was talked about in my home. I didn't come from a home where this was common knowledge. The only time that I really heard about accounting and finance is when I would occasionally flip through channels and land on that channel that had all these numbers scrolling at the bottom of the screen, all these different stock tickers and stuff like that, to where I really didn't understand what was going on there. I really didn't understand, what was being said on that. And it took me some time of really digging in to learn. But over the years of working in finance and accounting, I learned a ton. And then from after school, I went into working for one of the 4 biggest accounting firms in the world, did a lot of auditing. I learned a lot, got to see behind the scenes of a lot of major companies, and really saw how they thought about business. To be in the room with senior level executives, to hear the types of conversations that they were having. And it really opened my eyes to a lot that I just didn't know before. And from there, I started working with Fortune 500 companies and doing different roles in finance. So really understanding not only just the accounting and the technical side, but how do we take what we do in finance and then how do we make sense of it for making operational decisions? And by far, probably the most impactful role that I had, during my time in, I would say probably 3 very impactful roles. The first one was I worked in investor relations. And in investor relations, my job was to work with 2 other people, the VP of investor relations and the director of investor relations. And what we would do is we would work with the senior level executives, the CEO, the CFO, in helping craft the story of how they were going to communicate to the Wall Street analysts. Now, at the time I was there, the company had revenues of north of $14 billion a year. So it was a really, really big company. And it was one of the original companies that was on the Dow Jones Stock Exchange or stock index. And one of the big things that I spent a lot of time doing was reading through the Wall Street analyst reports. So all of these major Wall Street banks that invested in companies like that, my job was to sit through and read their analyst reports, read their analysis. And in some cases, when I saw mistakes or I saw errors in the things that they were saying and the things that they were doing, bring it up with the executive team and saying, hey, here's what we need to do to address this. Because being in investor relations, there's only so much information we can make public without it triggering an SEC issue. So that role really opened my eyes to a lot about when it comes down to investing and how you tell the story and what terms matter and also who's paying attention to what. And in that process, I also got the chance to meet, different hedge fund leaders and also different major investors who, some of their average investment amount was they were trying to decide what to do with a $500 million investment fund. Like, what company should they invest in? And when you sit in rooms like that, you tend to hear conversations that are at a level that you are like, wow, this is what really gets talked about in these types of rooms and these types of settings. And then from there, I went back into working in the business and really working in different segments of helping with M&A activity where we were either buying or we were selling a business. And then eventually my wife and we moved to the Charlotte area and I started off working with a tech company in Charlotte, North Carolina, and helping them buy other companies. And then we went through a round, we helped them raise about $65 million in private equity funding. And a lot of that was just helping craft that story, supporting that journey of how do we communicate with our investors to make sure that we are telling the story and being as clear as we can be about where we are, where we're going, and to do it in a way that really piqued the interest of potential investors that would then invest in the business. And like I said, during my time there, we were able to raise over $65 million in private equity funding. which allowed for a massive expansion and continued growth of the business. And from there, I decided I had all the pieces that I need to lead that and to start my own firm. So now I run my own firm, the TL Turner Group. We focus on bookkeeping and CFO services. And on the CFO side, we spend a lot of time helping entrepreneurs and business owners craft the financial side of their story. I mean, we've done some partnerships with the local economic development centers. We've also worked with some universities. And one of the things that we get a lot of calls on at times is we get calls on from different companies or different organizations that are sponsoring pitch competitions. And one of the common things that they tell us is they say, hey, people really struggle telling the financial story of their business. So one of their requests to us is, can you give some time to some of our top contestants and help them understand how to better tell their story? And we started doing that last year and working with, different organizations that are hosting pitch competitions where they're giving out funding to entrepreneurs. And since we've been doing that, some of the entrepreneurs that we've been working with and consulting with, they've been landing in the top 1 or the top, 2 positions, and they've been able to get grant funding. They've been able to win pitch competition because a lot of it comes down to how you tell your financial story. And so outside of doing all that, like I said, our firm is recognized in the New York Times in 2021 as a top Black-owned business that you would love. And then also this past year, we've been recognized I was recognized personally as a national 40 under 40 Black CPA. And one award that I was notified of it, that it is coming out, another 40 under 40 award related to finance and valuations is coming out. Since they haven't announced it publicly, I can't say the name of the organization, but there is another award on the way because of the work that we're doing to support small and medium-sized businesses, of really helping people understand these things that are talked about in very important rooms that often don't get shared with everyone. And so what our goal is how do we help do that? And that is why my wife and I, we started a media company called the Business Talk Library. And there we do a lot of speaking. We post a lot of content, create a lot of videos, some courses. Most of the stuff we've done over 500 videos and podcasts, and the combination of such that we've released for free in the past, I would say in the past 2 years. And part of that is because we are trying to get the message out about things that people don't commonly hear, because maybe they haven't been fortunate to be in some of the rooms that we've been in. So our goal is, how do we take those things that we know, things that we were exposed to, and bring it back to small and medium-sized businesses? So the first thing that I think that we really have to establish is the core of understanding the language of business is accounting. Now, there's a famous saying, and I believe that the first person to say this one, or the person who's probably the most popular for saying this, is Warren Buffett. But I believe that he's even talked about, it's not his original statement, but it is true that accounting is the language of business. And one of the things that I tell a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners is that if you don't know how to tell your accounting or your financial story, then you're not going to be able to communicate well with other people when it comes down to trying to get investment in your business and trying to grow your business. Because the reality of it is that most people don't get into business because they love the financial side of it. Now, they want the financial rewards, but they don't necessarily love, the getting into the details of the finance. They want the outcome. But the challenge about that is that you won't be able to get the financial outcome that you want if you don't develop a good, solid foundation or a basis for understanding this part of your business. And so, to make it simple, because I don't think that you need to go to school to get a degree in accounting or go get a master's or become a CPA. I don't think that you need all of that. And to be honest with you, if I'm being very, very frank, most of the stuff that I learned in college and studying accounting, I don't necessarily use it on a regular basis. Now, there are some cases where you do tend to use a lot of it, but for the most part, when it comes down to dealing with, medium and small size businesses that are in that phase where they're looking to raise capital and they're looking to grow their funding, we're not really talking about all the technical stuff that I learned in accounting. And so what I did is for this session is pulled out some of those very key topics that I have seen in common transactions and things that I think that you should probably add to your vocabulary. And I think that you should also understand what it means. So now, when you start to hear other people talking about their business, you'll be able to think through these terms and you'll be able to think through these topics to help you kind of better understand what is that person saying? What does this mean? Because it will make you not only a more informed person, but it will make you a better business operator if you understand these key things. So the way that I think about it is I break it down into 3 key areas. The first one is going to be people. The next one is going to be concepts. And then the last one, we're going to dive a little bit into some of the key financial terms. So for the people, it's really thinking about a business. When you're going to have any type of investment conversation, there are some common things that you're going to hear and some common words that you're going to hear used and some common, I guess you would say, subject matters that come up. And in the area of people, a lot of times you may hear investors, or let's say a potential investor who's looking at your business, maybe looking and asking you like, do you have any partners in the business? Now, depending on how you look at that word, some people understand partners as, is your business structured as a partnership, meaning, you own X percent, they own X percent. Now, a lot of times when investors are asking, do you have partners in the business? They're not asking, are you legally structured as a partnership? Sometimes what they're referring to is, do you have a co-founder, or do you have someone else who is as deeply invested in the business as you are? Now, one of the things that you may want to do when an investor asks about partners is you may even just ask them, okay, in this context, how do you define a partner? Because that makes sure that you understand what they are actually asking. And then also when it comes down to investors. Now, when it comes down to an investor, a simple way to think about investors, and the reason why I think this definition is very important because a lot of people miss this. A simple way to think about investors these are people who believed in the vision of a company enough to put their own money at risk. So when you think about an investor, and I tell a lot of businesses this when they're like, hey, I need to find an investor. One of the things that I tell them is make sure you understand what you are asking a person to do when you are asking them to invest in your business. You are asking them to believe in the mission and your ability to execute enough that they would put their personal money or money that they're responsible for, that they would put that at risk to support your mission and your ability to execute. And so one of the things that helps a lot of businesses that I have spoken with and talked to is it helps you put in perspective. It helps you start to understand like the gravity of what you are asking someone to do when you are asking them to be an investor. Because in many cases, especially if you're a small or medium-sized business, people are putting some of their own funding into your business. Now, when you get to some of your larger investment deals and your private equity funding and your VC funding, is they may not necessarily be putting their personal money in. They may be putting money that they are responsible for managing in. But you do want to grasp the gravity of what you are asking an investor to do. The next part that comes up a lot of times in conversations are board members. Now, what board members are is some of your top key employees, like your CEO or typically some people in the C-suite may also be board members. but a lot of times they're going to be individuals who may not be employees in the business, but they have some type of specialty that will help the business move forward, where they become an active advisor for the business. Like one tech business that I was working with, they were in the fintech space. So some of the board members that they brought on were people who were former executives for large banks in the payment processing space, to where some of those board members had experience and they had a unique perspective that would help the startup grow faster, that could shine a light on different things. Now, when it comes down to a smaller business or a medium-sized business, you may be looking at it and saying, okay, all right, who should be on my board? One of the ways to think about that is to ask yourself, what are the critical skill sets that we need to actually help the business move forward? And do the people that you are inviting on your board, do they have experience in those areas? Do they have skill sets in those areas? Because as an investor looking at your business, they not only want to believe in the mission of your business, they also want to understand is, do you have the right advisors around you to help you actually achieve this mission? And then you will hear sometimes where some businesses or some investors will ask about, stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are very different from shareholders. Stakeholders are people who have an interest, some of it's direct, some of it's indirect, in the success of your business. One of the most obvious examples of stakeholders are the people in your community or your employees. Like, they have a huge interest in whether or not your business is successful. They may not necessarily be owners, but they do have an interest in seeing the success of your business. And a lot of times people are not aware of who the stakeholders are for your business. Like, who's going to be impacted if your business succeeds or if your business does not succeed. And then, of course, you don't want to forget about your customers. Your customers, and the best way that I can explain this for a lot of people is, your customers are going to be the people who pay for your product or your service. The reality of it is you may be giving your product away for free, and in your conversation with investors, they may ask about customers, and you may talk about, the people who are using the product and they're, I guess, taking a trial of the product for free. If that person is not putting money at risk to actually buy your product or your service, to many investment conversations, they're technically not a customer. They may be a person who may be giving you market feedback, but until they put their money at risk to actually own your product or to utilize your service, technically, you don't really have a customer relationship. Now, also another one are going to be vendors. That will play a role in your story. And what a vendor are the different third-party companies that you do business with that enable you to provide your product or your service. The other areas are going to be concepts. Now, one of the things that you'll hear, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about this tomorrow, is valuation. And I like to group multiples together, because valuation is simply how much is your business worth. Now, multiple gets into how you actually calculate what your valuation is, which we're going to get into that a little bit more into the story when we talk about that tomorrow. The other terms that you may hear about is solvency. And that really gets into is, do you have enough assets to keep your business alive? Now, one of the things you want to make sure that you understand that most businesses go out of business not because they have a bad business or not because their product doesn't work. Most businesses go out of business is because they run out of cash. So from an investor, they may be looking to see, how solvent is this business? Like, do you have enough assets to keep operating? Another concept you'll hear about is leverage. Now, leverage is a very, very important concept. Now, this is where you really start to look at your debt and how smart you are using debt to grow the business. And again, we'll talk more about that. Now, when it comes down to equity, equity is a term that we hear used in different contexts. Now, one context you may hear discussed is social equity, which has to do with human relationships and how one group compares to another. Then you may hear about financial equity, which is a common term you'll hear about investors, them putting their money into a business. And then you hear about accounting equity. Now, accounting equity is the simple assets minus liabilities. And so we'll discuss that a little bit more when we get to the telling the financial story. Now, the piece that I really want to call your attention to is when it comes down to key financial terms. And I tell people all the time is take a screenshot of this. Whenever you are trying to craft your financial story, one of the key things that I am looking for when I am reviewing a pitch proposal, or when I am putting together a pitch deck, or sometimes companies call me and ask me to do due diligence for them, meaning I'm reviewing the pitch of another company. And these are key financial metrics that I am looking for. So when you are telling your story, one of the things that you want to make sure that you are doing is that as you get ready to tell your story, you can discuss what does the revenue journey look like. Now, as I said before when I was talking about customers, is that your customers are going to be your paying customers, not the people who use your product for free, but the people who are actually paying to use your product or your service. And you really want to be able to tell the story of what's going on with my revenue. Now, also what you want to explain is you want to be able to explain, how do you get revenue? Is your business a subscription, meaning people sign up and they pay the same amount month over month? Or is it project-based, meaning people pay a one-time price every time they utilize your product or your service? So you want to make sure that you can tell the story, you understand, how do I talk about and define the revenue? Now, gross margin is when you think about your product or you think about your service, the revenue is the price that the customer is going to pay. But one of the other factors that you want to think about to get down the gross margin is how much does it cost you to provide that product or that service? And when you think about that cost, you want to ask yourself is, what are all the costs that I am paying specifically to deliver this product or this service? For example, in my firm, we provide bookkeeping to a lot of medium-sized businesses. One of the areas we've been working a lot with are our law firms. So when I think about to calculate my gross margin, one of the things that I have to think through is, okay, all right, what are all the costs that are directly related to supporting these law firms? So I have to think about the bookkeepers who do a lot of the back end, the software that we use to specifically support the reporting and those type of contracts. And then also all of the different programs that we use. Now, there are other costs related to my business, but they aren't directly tied to delivering the revenue. So when you back out what are your direct costs, you're going to get to what you call your gross margin. Now, this becomes a very, very important thing for investors. And the reason why is because if your gross margin does not exceed a certain level, then what investors are quickly calculating in their head is, if your gross margin is too low, then you're never going to make money in this business. Like, this business has no chance of making money. So one of the things that you definitely want to make sure that you understand is, how do you calculate your gross margin? The other aspect that I think you really want to pay attention to is your OpEx, or you may hear it as your operating expenses. Now, what this covers are all of the other expenses that are related to operating and running your business. Now, these are all of the back office expenses, the things that are not directly tied to the customer delivery, but they are important for you to run your business. So you want to understand that. Now, EBITDA, which is a term we'll talk a little bit more about in the story, is what that stands for is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Now, a simple way to think about this is that when you're running a business, if you take out a loan, there's going to be some interest that you have to pay. There's also going to be some tax implications. And then for the depreciation and amortization, a lot of times, if you make a really big purchase of something, let's say, at your business, you bought purchased a building. Now, when you're looking at financially, that building is going to be used over time. So you don't want to take all of that expense like on day one. What typically happens is you end up depreciating the value of that building over time. And so that's what falls into your depreciation. So the key thing there is investors want to understand, what does your earnings look like before that extraordinary stuff, which brings you down to helping them understand, how well are you operating the business? Like, if you didn't have the interest, the taxes, and the depreciation, how well are you actually running the operational aspect of the business? How profitable is that? And then we get down to net income, is where you add back in those interest, taxes, and depreciation. Cash flow is one that we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow. And then ROI is probably one of the most, I guess you'd say, overlooked parts of the story when it comes down to really telling your financial story. And we're going to dive into that a bit more in detail. But one thing I want to leave you with is, if you are trying to figure out, what terms really matter to the audience and the investor that you are speaking with, one of the things that you want to make sure that you do is you want to make sure that you understand, you do a little bit of homework on the potential investors that you're talking to. Now, I put these as cheat questions because even if you don't know a lot about your potential, audience that you're speaking to, or the potential investor, and let's say you don't have the ability to do a lot of research on them, but if you do have the chance to either have a conversation with them or someone that knows them, these are 3 common questions that I have seen people ask that have really helped you gain a lot of helpful insights so that you know how to craft your financial story. As I said before, when it comes down to telling, getting and attracting an investor to your business, a lot of that is going to come down to how relevant and how well you tell your financial story. And asking these questions beforehand will help you figure out how to really craft your message to tell a more compelling and a more interesting financial story. So definitely come back tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to be diving into some specific examples of how to tell the financial story. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's session. I would say enjoy the rest of the main stage sessions as well as the breakout sessions throughout the day. And I will see all of you back tomorrow. Thank you.
Hey, I want to welcome folks back to our main stage following our first breakout session. I hope that you have enjoyed the conversation so far. I've been reviewing some of the comments, and I had an opportunity to connect with some folks during the networking portion after the keynote, and I can just feel your enthusiasm. Many of you have shared just how informative things have been so far. Quick note about the networking: when you're in the conversation with a partner, you have the option to extend your time. So just be mindful of that while you're in conversation. We also have folks, LinkedIn profiles, speakers, and mine are also available. So if I was in a networking room with you and we didn't get an opportunity to finish up, feel free to reach out to me directly there. This is an opportunity for us to take a quick break before we hop into our second breakouts. And so with that, I just want to do a quick pulse check just to see how people are doing. So I'm going to invite our tech team to pull up our polls. And I just want to hear from you in terms of what you think. So first question that I have for you is, what is your immediate reaction following the keynote and the first breakout session? How are you feeling? How are you feeling right now? So I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that, and we'll just see where people are in the experience right now. There we go. Let's see. People are still processing here. A lot of people are engaged and feeling empowered. That's excellent to see. All right. So, next poll question I want to have for folks is, how quickly are you ready to move toward investment now? So, I'll give you some options here. Uh, are you moving at a snail's pace? So, still need a little bit more information, going to really take your time, not quite there yet in terms of diving right in, maybe dipping a toe in the water, but you're just moving a little slowly to the process, really taking it easy. Uh-oh. Looks like we have some confusion from Alan here. Is it with the poll process? We'll just pause for just a moment so things can catch up. There we go. Thank you, Magali, for the direction. What you can do is click the poll function right beside that chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Again, what we're doing is just a quick pulse check in terms of how people are experiencing the summit so far. Okay. So again, curious to hear, how quickly are you ready to move toward investment? So snail's pace, are you ready to soar to new heights right now and really gracefully move toward your investment goals? Are you ready to leap into it? So, like a frog, are you ready to get there quickly? Or are you sprinting to opportunities like a cheetah? So, after the sessions today, you are super excited about it and ready to go. So, it looks like most of you are ready to soar to new heights like a bird. And then the last question that I have for folks is, given the session on language, and even some of the insights pulled from Dr. Shante, I'm curious, where's the first place you're going to share your new language and some of the new terms that you've come across today? Are you going to journal it to yourself, offer it up to close friends and family? Are you going to share it with colleagues at work or on the internet or social media, or even with a random stranger that you meet? The reason this question is important is when it comes to learning and being introduced to new concepts, one of the best ways to anchor it in your brain is to amplify it and share it with others. And so I want to push everyone to take what they've learned today and offer it to the world. Let's not keep it contained just to this space. Let's spread the knowledge and spread the resources as much as possible. So it looks like a lot of folks are going to journal to themselves, really anchor it in, think about where this is going to be most useful for you in your life. So I love that. So that's going to lead me into sharing more about the upcoming session. So we have Terrell Turner, the F word, crafting your finance story. So this is part 2 from the first session. Okay. And so we often hear about the importance of telling your story in entrepreneurship, but you have to master the art of telling it through a financial lens. And so this session is going to help you do that. We also have Shane Bermalley, who is the leader of an organization called Carbon that's investing in social impact ventures. And so what we're going to talk about there is, how can investors help take the desperation out of, uh-oh, let's see. Oh, that's the preview for tomorrow. Forgive me, folks. Preview for tomorrow. Preview for tomorrow. Let me double check here. Just bear with me 1 second. Get some clarity here. Oh, I'm sorry, Wilson Lester. is coming up. So how investors and founders can engage, and then also disrupting the bias in the fundraising process. So forgive me for that. So we'll be hearing from Shane Vermally, who's going to talk a little bit about how can we take some of the desperation out of fundraising, and how can investors be a greater resource to um, entrepreneurs of colors. And then Wilson Lester is going to talk about how investors and founders can engage. And so, what does that relationship look like, and how can it be meaningful? Okay. So, I'm going to give folks an opportunity to hop back into networking before those sessions start. Or if you want to check out our expo and see what vendors and resources are available there, feel free to do so. Or if you need to take a quick bathroom break, grab some water or a snack, feel free to do that. They start at 12:55. Okay. And so we'll see you then. All right. So looks like we have folks already in session. So we're going to go ahead and get things started so we can make the most of the time that we have with our invited guest, Shane Vermally. So this session is all about disrupting the bias in the fundraising process. So we're going to be disrupting bias and also disrupting the fundraising process to understand what are the impacts and experiences of people of color and founders of color. The folks who are in the room, we hope, are primarily investors, because this conversation is really for you and is keeping you in mind. And so you all know who I am. You met me during the main stage. I really want to give the floor over to Shane to tell us a little bit about what he's doing, his work in the world with his organization Carbon, and how he hopes to shape the conversation today.
Yeah, hey, thanks for the invite. Pleasure to be here. I started Carbon about a year and a half ago with a very simple thesis, and it's really that I believe that we have enough technology in the world already to solve a lot of pressing issues, and that goes around basic civil rights around water, access to education, sustainable living, and how we kind of rethink the way business is done, with the true tenets of sustainability, which is economic, social, and environmental principles, all valued as one. But with that mindset of, if enough technology already exists, the problem is that we're not collaborating, that we're not sharing. So the concept was to create carbon copies of businesses that are already working to further these initiatives around the globe and empower local entrepreneurs to basically take that business on for themselves. And so we work with the original solution provider to identify something that's scalable, something that's replicable, and then how do we carbon copy that out into a network of entrepreneurs that then we can chain together to create this kind of long growing revenue and long standing business structure that actually creates generational wealth rather than being flipped within a 5 to 10 year time period.
Got it. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and start by really addressing the bias that exists in the fundraising process. So in your experience, Shane, we know that bias exists. I want you to talk a little bit about what are the biases and what implications does it have on founders of color?
Well, it's pretty damning. But at the end of the day, the concept of bias is one that's just ingrained in human nature, I think. So if you really step back and look at this fact that, people invest in things that they think actually resemble them, whether you know it or not. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is, where you are in the world. That's just a hard central fact that probably goes back to the beginning of time. And so I think when you unwrap that a bit, just from a capital landscape perspective, you just don't see too many people of color, period. You're usually, my entire career, I've been basically the only, I call myself the brown sheep in the room, sitting there, right? And, your voice is somewhat muted. When you do speak up, sometimes you got to watch your tone a bit because people view it as a threat, because there's this ingrained culture that comes not only from media, but also past experiences with people. And there's just, it's just how people have grown up in their surroundings and what they've dealt with, and just also what they already think, whether they know it or not. And that's where I think there's this layer of emotional intelligence that I think is our responsibility as founders and funders, no matter what side of the table you're on, to really look at the opportunity at hand. And I use the word opportunity because that's what's sitting there, right? You have a chance to invest or not. And what merits are you basing that investment on, right? There's standard core principles that, everybody will go through their due diligence. They'll look at the market opportunity. They'll look at the investment strategy. They'll look at the targeted returns. They'll look at the potential for returns. So if you can see that, all right, now you got to now match it up with the person sitting in front of you and the team that kind of stands behind that individual.
I love that.
Do those really match up? And is that something that gives you comfort? And I think,
I want to pause
Yeah,
just for a moment there, because what that is doing is taking us into the second part of this particular conversation, which is how we confront it. And what I'm already hearing is this idea of it's not me versus you, it's us and the opportunity. And some of the things you've already started to tease out in terms of what do we look for in terms of the opportunity in front of us, and then how does that impact how we view the team and the people who will help advance it. So I want you to talk a little bit about how do we confront those biases, which you've already started to do.
Well, I think one is acknowledging that there's a responsibility on both sides of the table too. I mean, so me as a founder and a managing partner of a group that's looking for LPs, there's a certain way you need to present your information. There's a certain way this needs to look and feel. So it's kind of naive to think that I'm going to come in here blazing guns, be so different than expect the same results that others that have gone through this more traditional process have had to gone through, but somehow I'm going to bypass all that. You still got to play the game. You still got to walk the walk, talk the talk, right? You still got to know what's going on. You still have to know how to position yourself. And at the end of the day, you still have to know your stuff, right? Like you have to know why your thesis is actually differentiated, why you believe you have the track record and the capability to execute on that. And again, I use the word belief because that's what it comes down to. You have to instill confidence not only in yourself, but on the other side of that table that you're capable of doing that. And it's a sell either way you're looking at it.
I want to pause for a minute on something that you mentioned in terms of like playing the game, and you kind of gotta walk the talk. And so with that, I think a lot of times founders are unaware of the things that they don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And so when you think about investment culture, how can we start to decode what the expectations are and what language actually matters or makes the difference in terms of funding?
Look, I think like anything, you got to do your homework. You got to know what you're stepping into. There's practice before the game, right?
Yeah.
So you got to take the steps to make sure your materials portray the investment opportunity, not only from my lens. And you got to remember something you said, we don't know what we don't know, but we also know too much at times that we take for granted. So the other person that's looking at our materials for their first time might not have any clue because we haven't dumbed it down enough. Because we know too much. We are immersed in this that, we kind of use this. I hate the term. It's like almost your grandparent needs to understand it, right? It needs to pass that like 80-year-old test where, is it so basic and clear that even your grandmother could understand this? And I think that's something that you got to be really real about, because when you look at a deck or any of your materials literally all day long, you just know too much. There's too much subliminally in the back of your head that you are already thinking about or know that somebody who's reading it for the first time has no clue about. So you got to make sure you're distilling the right points, but that's a responsibility on your part to really prep for that, make sure that outreach is proper. And then when you get the opportunity to sit down at the table, how do you convey that and bring some color into what you've already set forth?
One, I love that point in terms of understanding, okay, how can you simplify the complexity of your idea, of your pitch? The one thing I want to also ask is, how do we know the decision criteria for the investor, right? In terms of this idea of decoding expectations, how do we get access to that information, and what roles do investors play in making that transparent and clear for us?
Yeah, so look, there's different shades of investors, right? So in my world, I'm looking for limited partners, right, to invest into a investing vehicle. Now, if I were a startup looking for VCs, that information is rather public, right? There's sources like PitchBook. You can go to their website. You can just look at their post on LinkedIn. You can see the portfolio of companies that they've amassed and like what they're actually into to see if you align with that strategy. So there's a lot of indication there. When it gets to that LP side of the table, it's a little tougher because that's not normally advertised unless they're a very big institutional investor or a pension fund that's broadly advertised. this is how we invest in private equity or alternative investments. It's kind of cut and dry. Like, we look for XYZ to achieve these type of returns, right? So that's what's there. But I think then you got to figure out, where do you fit in that bucket? Clearly by the color of my skin, I fit in that diverse category. I'm also an emerging manager. I haven't actually had my own investment group before. I've been part of them in the past, but more as like a principal level, but not as a GP. So, that you start to figure out, okay, I fit in this bucket, but at the same time, you need to help convey that before you approach these investors, so they know where to think about you. And, so when I look at us, we're alternative investing, we're impact and sustainability, we're diverse managers, we're emerging managers. Right there alone, like there's 4 buckets to choose from. And that makes it kind of easy for an investor to be like, okay, I get it. But then there's some more, sexy, more differentiated vehicles out there where you're not this, you're not that. You got to help people figure out where to think about you, because that's the lens they want to see you through, and how they need to evaluate whether they can push you through the process.
Yeah. I want to think about the role of the investor in terms of making that accessible. And so at the tables you sit at the conversations that you're a part of with folks who are VCs, in what ways are they trying to go into community or make that information more accessible for founders of color?
Well, I think you've seen a lot of marketing around this, right? And I hate to call it brownwashing, but I think you've seen that. Just like there's greenwashing when the environmental stuff kicks up, it's the same thing. I think we've seen that socially. The real proof is like who's written the checks, right? I'd say go right to that portfolio page and start looking at those pictures. Go to those websites, see who those founders are. You're gonna know whether they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. That's the best way to do it. Right. And if you're an entrepreneur and you got other friends who might know these founders, it's another way to think about it. I mean, the reality is, look, there's a lot of BS out there. We all say we're going to do this. We want to focus on that. We realize we're empathetic to this cause or that cause, whatever it is. The only real way to settle that score is to actually cut money and actually write those checks. Right. And so be there at the table, include that in your portfolio. And then also look at their hiring practices, not just about where they're investing. Think about their own internal DNA, right? Like, so, if you looked at our management team, I'm the person of color. There's a couple of people from foreign areas, but you wouldn't know it just based on their lighter skin tones. But then when you look at our associate base, we've pulled people from all over the planet through all walks of life. And it was built that way because I believe the only way to change this, because if you start with the psychology in mind that we invest in things that make us comfortable or resemble us, my goal is also help put people in power that come from differentiated backgrounds. So when it's their time to make those decisions, they're the ones calling the shots.
I love that. Couple of things I just want to call out just from the short conversation we've had so far: the importance of simplifying the complexity of your pitch, of your strategy, so that when you present it in front of an investor, they can easily understand the value. The other thing is actually doing the homework to understand where there's alignment with who you are, and that investor interest is also something that I heard you share. The last thing I'll mention is this idea of who's writing the check, right? And what is the internal DNA of that venture fund or those investors, so that you know that these are people who are really walking the talk. So thank you just for sharing those quick nuggets. Anything else you'd like to add before I shift gears a bit?
No, it's a long process. Be prepared to hear a lot of no's.
Yeah.
But I also think too, on the other side of human nature is we all have common interests that pull us together as one. And part of your job as a person is to figure out what those interests are. Sometimes it's sports, music, media, whatever it might be. There's always a common thread. And if it's not apparent just based off the school you went to or off the color of your skin, try finding that thread and keep digging. And eventually you hit a tone. And it's just like anything else. That's when relationships are formed. And so the faster you can kind of humanize this relationship, then you kind of break down that barrier. I'm not just this person of color. There's something else there, because the reality is we all have to fight that. Right. And if you're aware of that and that psychology, you can actually use that to your advantage, because there is a process to how you start breaking down those walls when you encounter new faces.
Yeah, that's a great segue into the fundraising portion of what I want us to talk about, which is how do we take some of the desperation out of raising capital? So when we do finally get into the room, you know that it's a long journey and that it is a process. And so when we are making that pitch, when we're in front of the investor, I would say from your end as an investor, how are you putting that founder at ease and making that process one that is comfortable so that you can really extract the value and understand the opportunity?
Well, there's two schools on this, right?
Yeah.
They both involve emotional intelligence, but then some of them involve tough love. Because, I've had a lot of entrepreneurs that have, tried to pitch me, and you can tell the ones that are green into their first time. And I work with a lot of students. You have those ones coming out of school. The reality is, like, some of them had it kind of easy up until now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my job to kind of spank them and put them in their place and be like, this is what expect. If you're gonna go down this path, be prepared to be prepared.
Yeah.
Because you only get one shot. I go back to that 8 Mile Eminem, right? Like, you get this one shot. Don't miss that opportunity, because you're not getting back in that door unless you have expanded leaps and bounds to come back with something to impress them. Because once you ruin that first impression and you get that first pass, it's a lot hard to get in that door. But the other thing is to keep calm and stay collected, but also be confident. But be confident in the fact that I always give this "don't be Rudy" speech, because I can't stand Rudy, the football player.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys have seen the movie. Yeah. But, it's great to have all this passion, but if you don't have the competence, you're not going to get very far.
Okay.
And you need to be very real with yourself, because if you can't be real with yourself, you're not going to be able to sell that to someone else.
Tell me a little bit about that process, though, in terms of conveying competence. Like, from your view, what are the signals? What are the indicators that would suggest that this person has command over their space?
Yeah. So if you're at a seed stage company, and let's just assume you haven't built your product, right? So I'll start from the very ground up. But you knew what to do to set up the company, how it's set up. And then more importantly, you surrounded yourself with a really good team that brings the domain expertise. And, basically by them being involved and spending their time on it is a sign of validation. And the same thing goes with your board of advisors or other people you kind of bring to that strategy that really shows why this is differentiated and has an extreme compelling value proposition. Mm-hmm. That's the bare grounds, way to kind of show that confidence and illustrate to the outside that, wow, I got something here. Mm-hmm. Now, the next step from that is, okay, if I have a business, then how am I convincing my customer base and my target market that this is something that people want to buy and that they have to have? Not nice to have, but have to have. Right? Because I think there'll always be businesses. And I always stress this, and this is something you have to be very real about as a founder. Mm-hmm. Do you have a venture backable startup, or do you just have a small business? And there's nothing wrong with having either one of those, but be real about it, because when you have a small business, there's a whole different avenue of financing and growth expectations that'll come with that. But when you have a venture backable startup, there's a higher bar that you have to meet for differentiation, upside opportunity, growth expectations, all these different things that we're probably used to hearing through these entrepreneurial talks. But a lot of times these startups are really just good small businesses that can grow organically, and you get to keep your ownership, and you can do extremely well with that. And there's nothing wrong. You got to be real with yourself, whether you're going to go down that path or you're going to go down this really challenging field of trying to find capital, trying to put that cart before the horse a little bit because you're chasing markets. You got to anticipate the curve a bit. That's what makes a great venture opportunity real. But you have to be real if you really have that or not. And everyone thinks they do, but the reality is, like, when somebody comes in and pitches me the same thing I've already seen, 3 or 4 of in the last 2 weeks, it ain't that special, right? The team might be special. The team might be special, and like, you might be the ones that actually pull this off.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to evaluate. So you also have to illustrate that, not only do we have the idea, but we have the talent and the ability to actually pull this off and almost discredit the competition.
Hmm. I guess what is coming up for me as I'm hearing you say, really what that process is for people in terms of the compelling pitch, the team, the command over the actual business, understanding the value, what it could look like at scale. We know that there are founders of color who are going in, checking all the boxes, and the checks still aren't being cut. And so, from an investor side, I want you to push a bit and expose what's underneath that. Aside from bias, what are some of those barriers that are preventing people from actually writing the check?
Yeah. Well, the access is an issue, right? Because it's one thing, not everyone has this role. Let me give you an example. I grew up in Indiana, right? And I came out to Wall Street and I had no clue other than taking a class or two in college, even though I majored in finance. I didn't really know the world I was going into. Right. But so access is a number one problem, I think, for people of color. So unless you went to the same schools or have the same networks that overlap with your investor base that you're going after, don't expect to be able to just knock on that door and get in. Right. Or just hit somebody up on LinkedIn. You got to have something really compelling to have that cold email or outreach go through. And you have to do that in a way where it grabs somebody's attention.
Follow up on that in terms of the access piece, because again, this is about how can investors start to disrupt the bias in the fundraising process.
Yep.
When it comes to creating access,
Yes.
what have you seen investors do outside of marketing? Really
I think
moves to connect with people.
I think it's all marketing, but at the end of the day, just saying that I'm accessible and like, hey, here's my email. Getting on a panel like this and being like, you know what, if you have a really interesting idea, I want you to reach out to me. I want to hear about it. Or, you know what, we have a whole group that's, we set a days aside where, you know what, we're going to look at all founder initiatives across these categories, hit us up with everything. And it's things like that. It's just literally just opening the gate. It's answering that door, like leaving that door open a bit. But also helping identify liaisons. Like, I also run an advisory group at Perkins Coie. We function like this in-house investment banking platform that's free for clients and all. But those groups like that are gateways and catalysts into that venture fundraise process that helps bridge those connections, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're dot connectors. So if those investors can say, hey, I work with so-and-so, these folks a lot are like, here's how deals usually get to me. If you can get through them and they like it, then you got a better shot at getting to me. Yeah. There's different flavors, but either way, it's helping open up the door and saying, I want to look at stuff. So nothing's more frustrating when you try to go find somebody on LinkedIn. There's no contact info. You got to have their email to connect with them. You go on their website and then they link you to their LinkedIn, and it's just this never-ending circle of not getting anywhere. And so some of that's by design, because you got to realize, these individuals get 2,000 business plans a year. But at the same time, I don't feel bad for you because you also signed up for that. That's your job.
Right. So what I'm hearing from this is the strategic partners with organizations who have an established footprint in the communities that folks are trying to reach. Outside of those partnerships, have you seen any other innovative programs that investors have adopted to really start to mitigate some of the bias or create greater access to the opportunity?
I think the accelerators have been a huge leap forward in that direction, where you have either reputable academic institutions that funds have aligned with, and it goes for LPs as well. There's different groups around Black and Brown founders, trying to look for emerging managers, those type of things. It's being part of these ecosystems and putting that moniker up there saying like, hey, we're here, we're approachable. It's those type of catalyst organizations that I think create these circles of trust, because that's what it comes down to, right? I just don't want to be hit up by anyone and anybody because everyone has a great idea, right? But trying to find those spheres of influence that actually overlap with those target funds you're going after.
Got it. I'm thinking about those partners, and I'm also thinking about access too, because it's like we're introduced to the story of the white entrepreneur of tinkering in the garage, right? Comes up with a cool software, and somehow magically through the support of family and some investor, it takes off and is a unicorn. And so I'm curious to know, in your experience, what do those unicorns look like for communities of color? And how are we reaching those folks who are in communities of color that are tinkering in their garage, right?
I'll tell you what it is. I think it's direct relevance to their experience and their innate knowledge of the investment opportunity, because they've seen the gap that needs to be filled. And so take, for example, like, let's just use some of these Nigerian unicorns that have just come up literally like over, they seem like they're overnight, but if, these are all long slogs, but these were big untapped markets with massive populations. I mean, Nigeria in a sense is going to be the fastest growing population in the world, but it's also become this great entrepreneurial center. So when you see some of these fintech startups that are just creating some of the basic access to digital wallets or some type of money transfer that never existed before, right? That is a massive opportunity, but usually it's that level of street smarts intersecting now with the business smarts of like, how do I combine these things to basically take advantage of this great market opportunity that sits in front of me? And I think it's that knowledge. When I look at people of color and communities, they know things about their customer base because they are one of them. And the outsider who's sitting up high in a different area doesn't necessarily understand that because they've never lived that. Right? It's as simple as like when we look at impact opportunities, when we pull out a water filter here and people are like, oh, what's that? Why do you need that? Because doesn't everybody have clean water? I'm like, no, there's actually 1 billion people on the planet that don't have clean water. But you know what? A lot of people have to walk for water because you assume that just everyone has piped water. But if you can eliminate that walk, or you can find a way to clean up that water and give back that time and resource, that's an amazing opportunity, and people are willing to pay for that, no matter how poor they might be.
Got it. I want to transition us to some QAs, some questions that other people are posing. Just to play back that piece, though, it's trusting that the founder is an expert in their own experience. And so as an investor, that is key, is trusting that these folks who are in front of you are the expert in their own experience. Magley has a question. Are there categories that we, Black and brown folks, tend to lean to that VCs aren't really interested in? Does it have to be tech? Can investors shift their category expectations by learning our culture for communities of color, or do we have to shift the categories they are directing their dollars to?
I think that's one of my biggest frustrations with entrepreneurs, to be honest. I think so many people get dissuaded and shift what they see ahead of them as the opportunity because the investors say it needs to look like this or that in order for them to invest. I don't believe in that, because I think there's other buckets of capital out there. Now, of course, if you hear that from 30 out of the 50 that are relevant for your stage, there's probably something to it. But I don't think you need to morph your strategy just to fit somebody's investment thesis, because you identified that for a reason. However, I do think that, again, this comes back down to the small business versus venture backable business. Because if you have a venture backable business and you're going after VC dollars, yes, it does need to have certain parameters that exhibit the potential needed to generate the 10x plus returns that are required for that type of risk capital. Right? So it has to have certain characteristics and attributes. Yes. Now, does it matter where that industry is? Not necessarily. Because you looked at back when the sneaker boom and all, like before everyone was collecting sneakers, they had to do it through eBay and some other ways. And then all these marketplaces started to emerge. Like something simple as that, emerged from like these types of communities that you're talking about, where it was literally kind of streetwear, took its own life, but it found ways to use the existing tools that existed in the digital world to fulfill the commerce, right?
And that, I think, is the crux of the question there is, does it have to be technology at its core? Because to your point, it could be streetwear, it could be health and beauty. And if I'm not the tech entrepreneur, but I do have a scalable business that could yield significant returns, like what does the investor need to do to see the opportunity there, right? Or to move beyond that tech mindset?
I think pure tech opportunities comes in waves. I think where we're at now, of course, we're going into the Web 3.0 and things like that. There's a new layer of technology that wasn't there before. But for the most part, you got a lot of startups now that are just combining different tool sets and technologies that are readily available. They're not developing anything proprietary. The proprietary nature is in what are they doing with that technology and how are they combining that together to create this either a unique UX, UI experience for the customer. Maybe they tighten up the supply chain, whatever it is. A lot of them aren't inventing anything other than the way they're sifting through the data and creating the more relevancy. So that's where you're seeing as a lot of the science, I think now in a lot of these, I'm generalizing, of course, more like the software oriented startups. Like most of the tool sets are already built. It's just building a foundation from that to do something different.
Is there an example that comes to mind?
All of them. I mean, take all these SaaS players. I mean, take a company that's even looking at hospital reorganization of how they streamline operation. It's really just a data exercise. They're using sensors or they're using visualization tools. They're using data sets where they show like, here's our operations. And then it's just mixing all that together to sift through then, some type of algorithm to see, okay, this is the most optimized approach on how to do it. And so people are selling enterprise software that says, hey, we can revamp your enterprise to make it much more efficient and boost its profitability. That's just one simple example.
I'm curious, and I'm going to get to a conversation about pitch decks, but when it comes to investing beyond the financial, what are you seeing investors do to embrace a team that may have a really valuable business opportunity, but that needs some additional support? Are there models out there where people are providing that financial support and also bringing in some tech tools or additional team members to help drive the business forward?
Yeah, I mean, more often than not, I think, just like anything else, just as much as a startup has to differentiate from its competition, funds have to do the same thing. Unless you're that tier one brand name, I want a seat at the table. So how do I get that seat? Maybe I have like this middle office or this kind of entrepreneurial support group that helps you with your accounting, your KPIs, your tracking. Maybe I help with connections through our LP base or customer base to really be a catalyst to your business. To me, those are the things you got to look out for. Those are the things that really create a value-added investor. But it's also a sign those are the investors that are really hungry to take this journey with you because they've set up a system and infrastructure to do just that.
Yeah, that is systematic change right there. When we think about disrupting the bias, where it's less about I'm expecting you to come and perform, in a way that I'm traditionally accustomed to. I'm seeing where there are resources and needs and gaps that you have, and I'm willing to provide that equitable support to make sure that you get the outcomes that both of us find beneficial. Now, here's the other question. When it comes to the pitch process, do you think the VC pitch process is financially failing entrepreneurs of color? Why or why not?
That pitch process is a very vague statement. I mean, first of all, it's assuming you even have access, right? If you have access and you found a way in, it's kind of like if someone helped you get the interview and then you blow it, that's kind of on you.
Yeah.
Right. But if you had the right ingredients in that pitch deck and you had the right materials, then you have an even shot to some degree. Now, of course, there is the problem where, and let's just go back to what a lot of people are talking about. Like if a VC has a Stanford buddy that comes by with the exact same idea, more often than not, they're going with that buddy because they know them, they know the school they came from, whatever there's this like, okay, that's the one I want to back. Right. So the pitch process itself, I think, is how you actually get in the door and then what are you actually selling? And then, of course, you got to really behind the scenes, there's stuff that's already looks and feels somewhat similar. And I think that's the thing that we all are naive of, regardless of skin color, is that, we're not just pitching in a vacuum here, that there are 10 other companies that are doing the exact same things. And guess what? Sequoia looked at all of them in the last 3 months. So you coming into the door, you're not selling me not always something totally brand new. Just if you go in with that mindset, then you got to sell them on the other pieces of capability, executions, all that stuff.
In what ways are VCs setting the entrepreneur up for success? So have you seen investors in advance of a pitch lay out criteria or provide resources to ensure that when that happens, this person is prepared to make the most compelling pitch possible?
It happens via conversation, typically not on email.
Okay.
Like if I'm out at a cocktail party, or if we're having drinks or we're having dinner, and let's just say I introduce you to one of my VC buddies. I'm like, hey, yo, Matt's got a really cool startup. This is what they do. And they might be like, oh, that's really interesting. When you send me something, really show me the difference of this, or really drill down on this versus that. This is a space we're interested in, but we're seeing some activity there. This is where we're kind of stuck. They'll help guide you through where you need to focus.
And
and so many people get caught up on the market side.
Yeah.
And usually, look, as long as you got a multi-billion-dollar industry, and of course you got to make sure it's actually relevant to you, but that you don't need to get caught up in that. It's what are you doing to get there, and how are you going to prove that you can get there, and have you been there before?
I'm hearing all of this and thinking about the ways in which bias can creep into that process in terms of folks' access to networking and sort of their comfort with the process, using conversation as a means to sort of provide feedback rather than making it accessible on the web or via email. And so it makes me think in terms of disrupting the bias in the process. It's moving away from the interpersonal, right? And again, making it accessible and transparent for a person if they don't want to attend the beer or the cocktail hour with you, they can still get the information that they need and be set up for success.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions in the Q&A? I want to make sure that we get to those. Let's see. Okay, looks like we're good. So next thing I want to ask is, in what ways can investors be a resource for founders to set them up for success? So what have you seen in terms of
before or after the check?
This is before and after the check.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen before where, especially this happens a lot on the earlier stage. Well, actually, it happens throughout the spectrum. I'll tell you why. On the earlier side of things, if you find something that it's almost like if you found a rough diamond that you don't want anybody to know about, right? Keep that somewhat of a secret, but you start sharing it around to a couple folks in your networks because you also want to show, hey, look what I have access to. Look what I'm working on, type of thing, especially if you're a VC in fundraising mode. I saw this happen just in the last 5 months where there's an interesting company that was being started. It was a VC down in like the Southwest that doesn't necessarily get access to New York and West Coast type deals. And they knew they had something special. And they were like one of the first calls because that's where one of the initial relationships was. They actually invited that company down to their LP meeting, which for a pre-seed startup, almost like that's very rare, right? But they were leveraging that for a little bit of show and tell, but it was also to help get direct investment into that company. So that entrepreneur was now given a chance to not only pitch to that fund, but also their LPs, because they were going to create a special purpose investment vehicle to do that deal, right? So you had that, and then you also had in that LP base a lot of potential customers for this technology as well. So those are just some simple examples where, a VC might take a company under their wing and really show them around, introduce them to maybe some academic talent if it's something really hardcore science, show it to some customers to really get, okay, here's what this technology should look like in order for it to be market ready, those type of things. So that's all pre-check, right? And you'll see that throughout the process and throughout even later stage investing, because by the time it gets to like a series C or D round, if it's a competitive deal, VCs are now not in the favor, right? Or the investor is the one that's at odds, because now they have to prove that they're worth being at that table because that company is so hot right now Why do I want you at my table? What are you going to do for me? Why should I let you in? And so you get this other courting process that goes with that because there's deal demand, right? Then after the fact, again, there's a reputational value, but and this is the thing a lot of founders don't understand. Just like I talked about the LP GP relationship, right? So the VCs have investors as well. Unless it's someone's own personal money that they're investing, there's no one else they really have to report to and call the shots with, right? But for most funds, they have an investment committee, which is internal, but they also have an external group that kind of signs off on some stuff. And they're the ones that, kind of call the shots because it's their money, right? So in order to get more money down the line, especially if it's a first-time vehicle, they want to show a track record of delivering assistance and the ability to move the dial forward for their portfolio. So whether they lead the investment, okay, what else did they do other than cut a check? How much did they help manage on the board? How much were they responsible for? Because the one thing you want to show is, as a VC, and I go to my LPs, like, wow, you know what? I really changed this company from what it was now to this, and here's what I did to make that happen. Here's the network I use. Here's the customer deals I got them. Here's the distribution channels I helped establish. That's the kind of life that takes on beyond that. And then, COVID was a really good shining point on the VCs who really knew their stuff and the ones that didn't, because when everything tanked at the beginning of 2020, most VCs were in full triage mode on their portfolio. And I can tell you, like, some companies I talked to are like, wow, you know what? I had some great VCs stepped up, or, I had them tell me like, wow, that's the most worthless bunch of investors I could ever imagine, because they had no idea what to do. They'd never been in this situation, and so that's what really dictates the future, not only reputation, but also the ability for these VCs to raise capital down the line.
I'm curious with that, Shane. Are you seeing VCs consider alternative models of bringing in aspiring investors? So when you think about the current setup and who's involved in those investment conversations, or who is contributing financially, the diversity of those folks, and in what ways are VCs expanding the identities that they have at the table, so that also is helping to disrupt some of the bias in their process?
It's definitely happening. I'm saying it's happening for a handful, I think, but the ones that are doing it are really leading the charge, and it's the ones that really take this diversity and inclusion piece very seriously, and they understand that there's a massive succession planning issue here. That I go back to that. You remember that shot they showed of the White House interns, where it's literally just a sea of white kids. And that's the one image I park in my head that, we need to combat across every industry vertical. Right. And so, I think a lot of VCs are taking that to heart too, but they're also doing that from a portfolio perspective, but they're also doing that from the way they hire as well. And so they might bring in LPs or people from their expert, I would say, Rolodex. And I know we did this a lot at the fund I was at. We basically, when we get far enough down in due diligence, we pull people from our network to sit in on a meeting with that portfolio perspective, right? That target company. And it'd be somebody from the industry who's already built a company or is sitting up high somewhere that could either be a customer, an acquirer, whatever. And you bring people into the fold to kind of show this dynamic of, what you're doing. But I've seen people do that a lot with, there's consumer goods. It could be athletes. It could be, somebody who has some type of influence that kind of helps seal the deal for them too.
Well, that's what I'm sitting here thinking about too, is for aspiring investors of color, how do you raise your profile to get into these networks, to get access to limited partners? Is there a capital requirement, or is it something that's based off of influence? Like, what are some of the ways you're seeing aspiring investors break through into some of these venture capitalist conversations?
You mean aspiring investors to go after LPs?
LPs,
so if I'm
LPs or VCs, yeah.
I think it goes back to psychology a bit, right? Like, everybody has certain things they're into. So if you figure out that is, whether it's sports, media, if I show up with LeBron James and you're a big basketball fan, chances are you're going to like me really quick, right? If we get to go hang out or something, like if there's a way to incorporate those desires and link that as part of the relationship, that becomes a bond that's very special and unique. And I think you start building out circles that way. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be just with influence, but that can be through experts within the field too, right? It could be through academia, who are some leading researchers looking at this issue. Who are the regulators going down this path? If you look at stuff like hardcore like defense technology, you got a couple of generals behind you. All that stuff really starts to bring all these other areas of access that you never had privy to before.
Yeah, I'm seeing some comments in the chat here. It is very much about similar interests, this idea of similarity bias, right? So where there is a shared interest. So if you're looking at venture funds, if you're looking to connect with people, seeing where there is alignment in values and interests, so that, you can start to break through a bit. What I'm also hearing is that the pipelines for gaining access are through academia and sometimes through industry. So the higher you rise in industry, the farther you go with your research can put you at tables with people who, are doing this work. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And I see some comments in here from Magley saying, this is really why we need more investors of color, folks who understand entrepreneurs of color, because these networks seem to be so tight and so closed. So the more that we can start to create our own funding models and own funding pools, the stronger we can be as a community. Cool. So we are almost at time, and we've covered a lot of ground. So I just kind of want to start to recap some of the things that I've heard over the course of our conversation that I think are really compelling. The first piece is around really simplifying the complexity and making sure that decision criteria on the investor side is transparent and accessible, not just through interpersonal dynamics, but through your marketing materials, also through strategic partners, folks who are connected to community, so that folks have access to you through a number of different channels. In terms of aspiring investors, really leaning into those venture funds and those networks that align with your values and interests. Also continuing to push yourself to elevate in whatever space you are, because that's going to put you at tables that you may not normally have access to. And so also in terms of the venture side, if you are an investor, thinking beyond just finance, but also the support services that you can bring with investment in an entrepreneur of color, because they may not have the technical team, but they have a really compelling idea and a really important value add business that just needs some additional resourcing. So that's that equity piece that helps to disrupt the bias. Any other things you might share, Shane, as we come to a close? Any other imparting words or wisdom you think is important for the investor and also the founder?
I don't think there's been any greater opportunity in the history of this country and entrepreneurship to make a move now. Whether you're an investor or you're an entrepreneur, person of color, this is a chance to make a stand for what you really believe in and provide that opportunity, because it's right at our doorsteps. I'm telling you, man, like you go back to even Martin Luther King days, right? That still happened within relatively a vacuum within this country. When George Floyd hit, you had people in Paris taking to the streets within 24 hours. The global reach that this has achieved now, and it has shined a light on the problems that we face around racial challenges and access, has been no greater in the history of the world. And everyone knows it now. So now people's corporate identity is judged on how they actually handle this situation. Right. And this whole thing about brownwashing is the real players are coming out very fast. Right. They're rising to the surface. So if you're lacking and you're still underwater, you still have a chance to really take a stand and be something different. Like I always say this, every minute that goes by is a chance to turn it all around. So the time is now. This is when action is needed. just make it happen. But I think everyone's just got to understand the game that there's into, and over time that game will change and it'll morph. But for now, there is a certain way things are done. Just like anything else, get educated on that and make it happen.
I love it. Thank you so much, Shane.
Pleasure, man.
This has been absolutely just so informative in terms of kind of pulling back the veil in how some of these conversations happen, in the way that we show up, in the way that investors show up, so that we can start to bridge this divide, so that we can disrupt this bias. I hope that our participants have found this to be useful and helpful as you navigate your own entrepreneurial journey. For investors that are on the call, I hope that this has provided some insight into how you can mitigate bias within your organization and within your process, so that you can welcome more entrepreneurs of color into your fold and into your world. So thank you. And we will return back to the main session. For folks, if you want to hop into networking, Shane, I don't know if you want to stick around a bit, maybe linger into the network portion. Okay, just so folks can connect with you. If people want to connect with you, I know we have your LinkedIn. Is there a website?
I just put my email there.
Perfect. Okay,
because
cool.
I believe in access. So
there you go. Okay. All right.
I can't be talking all this and then not do it. So
exactly, man. Thank you for walking the talk.
Got it.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, that brings us to the end here, and I will see you all back in the main session. If you have questions for Shane, feel free to reach out to him. Or again, he's going to pop into our networking portion of the hop in, and you may be able to connect with him there. So thank you for your time.
All right. How's everybody doing today? I am ecstatic to be here and a part of the Inclusive Investment Summit, and I hope this event continues to go on and on and on. We've had some terrific speakers today, and I appreciate you all joining the Can I Trust You? How Investors and Founders Engage. So one of the things that I like to do whenever I start a conversation is I like to create space for context. So before I get started talking about who I am and what I do and some ideas on how I think that each of us that are seeking investment should approach acquiring that investment, why give up equity in your organization in order to acquire that investment, and what should be expected of you. I want to share a quick video. Some of you may have seen this before, and it's not the video that Partners in Equity has in the expo room, which I definitely want you all to check out. But it's a video of work that we did in 2020 and really sets the stage for why equity is an imperative for Black and Brown communities.
Black people's sordid past with and as property stretches back to at least 1863, when 4 million slaves were emancipated and today's equivalent of $48 billion in assets evaporated from the balance sheets of Southern planters and the banks that counted enslaved people as collateral. Since then, the restraints on Black economic mobility have grown more subtle, but no less effective. The Wilmington Insurrection and the Tulsa Massacre cost 500 plus Black lives, and today's equivalent of $250 million in Black wealth. The persistent impact of redlining has cost Black families billions in wealth, despite being outlawed in 1968. The foreclosure crisis cut Black household wealth in half. And then there's COVID, which beyond the human toll, closed 41% of Black businesses in 2020. Events like these, compounded by the structural headwinds of Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and the Black-white appraisal gap, explain why white household wealth is 10 times Black wealth, and why median Black wealth is forecast to fall to 0 by 2053, unless there's a fundamental shift in the way Black wealth is created and sustained. However, as the saying goes, pressure makes diamonds, and the journey of Black ownership and wealth in America has yielded one of history's most entrepreneurial people. The Black American is uniquely entrepreneurial, with a 50% higher likelihood of starting a business than the average American. As we chart the course of our recovery, realizing the promise of Black entrepreneurship represents one of our best opportunities to rev the engine of economic growth for all communities. With this in mind, Brazil NC and its allies encourage policymakers, funders, and partners to invest in Black business ecosystems at scale. Instead of debt that weighs Black businesses down, we must provide equity-like capital that propels them forward. Equitable access to public contracts and private sector supply chains, and the right advice at the right time are mandatory to ensure that the 41% of Black businesses that went away during COVID not only return, not only thrive, but drive this new economy.
Great. So I appreciate you all taking the time to watch that video with me. I think it's really important that we understand the challenges that are historic to particularly Black communities in this conversation, and how we ensure that we create more equitable opportunities for businesses, particularly to gain access to the support that they need to thrive and really scale in an environment where scalability has historically escaped these communities because of disproportionate investment in businesses that do not look like these communities primarily. So again, my name is Wilson Lester, and I am the co-founder of a group called Partners in Equity here in North Carolina that is intentionally focused on creating an opportunity for Black business owners, brown business owners, and indigenous business owners to acquire the real estate where they operate. And we focus that way because we often talk about gentrification in neighborhoods and homes turning over, but we don't talk about commercial displacement in a meaningful way. And the reason that we're fighting against that is because of this number right here, 2053. You saw in the video that there is documented empirical research that demonstrates that Black and Latino wealth in the US will be a median of 0 by 2053. And we have yet to really understand how the impact of our recent pandemic has reduced this number to a much sooner date. The majority of the US will be Black or brown by 2040, which puts this community particularly at danger of being severely impacted for generations and generations to come if we don't have individuals and groups that are focused on resolving this challenge and creating more opportunities for wealth creation. So I've partnered with my band of brothers here, Talib Graysmans and Napoleon Wallace, to build Partners in Equity that really goes out into this community of impact and social impact investors to identify capital that's aligned with what we're working toward. So today, I really want to focus in on the word equity as it relates to finance and really unpack several things that you should really think about as you're approaching an investor and understanding what you're trading and why you're trading, and hopefully you're discovering people that are aligned. So equity, what is it? Put simply, equity is ownership of an asset of value. That asset could be shares in a company that is producing meaningful revenue. When I say meaningful revenue, I'm talking about year over year activity or IP, intellectual property that's valued in the marketplace that company has identified and created and is now selling or licensing. That is what equity is in the finance term, ownership of an asset of value. All right, but to engage an investor, to engage a founder, is all based on trust. Particularly with private equity, foundation equity, it's really a basis of trust, and it's hard to have a meaningful relationship between these two parties if trust doesn't exist. And many times as a business owner, particularly a business owner of color, this space of trying to get someone to part with capital to help you achieve your dreams can be challenging when those individuals don't identify with you. And that's why it's important to dive into this next part that I want you to write down and remember as you're engaging folks and making sure that you're targeting in the right way. So your expectation is as good as your ability to identify the right investors. So if your expectation is that folks should invest capital into your business, you really have to do a good job of identifying the types of investors that you should be in front of. It is an enormous industry. One of my favorite things about private equity in particularly is because it's near limitless in the United States of America and really across the globe. Earlier in my career, I worked in providing capital to small business, and I always felt like I was in a competition for dollars because it was either grant-based or I was trying to source money from the same pot as other individuals and other entities. But in this space, there's so much capital. It's really, the competition is less, but the legwork on finding the right investors is more challenging. So really targeting the right investors is essential to your pathway to achieving investment. So things that you should ask yourself: can they contribute to my brain trust? Can this investor that I'm talking to really help build me up? Do they know about this type of activity? Are they accessible? Will they allow me to ask questions? Will they be a partner? Will they be more than just a contributor of capital? Will they really talk with me about different aspects of my business as I scale it while their capital is engaged? Is there an opportunity for additional capital from this investor as I scale, or sources of capital? This is really key. So let's say I took on $100,000 at one stage in my business from an investor. Would that same investor be able to contribute $50,000 to my business, or be willing to discuss contributing that kind of capital to my business down the line? As we've grown, we've acquired more human capital assets. We've acquired more relationships that are allowing us to provide our services or product in a different way. Would they be for me in that? And if they could not provide the capital, do they have the kind of network where they could pick up the phone and call another entity or individual that has alignment with what it is that I'm doing, and may be willing to contribute additional capital as I continue to build this organization? Third question: does their portfolio look like me in terms of industry, age of business, and physical demographics? So what that's saying there is, if I am in the, particularly if I am in the hair care industry in terms of designing hair care products, if I'm talking to investors that have no familiarity with the space, particularly any familiarity with the multi-billion-dollar industry that Black hair is, and I design products for that, how can I expect them to really fully understand the value beyond the Black and white? And many times when these investors are making the decision, the Black and white is important, but if they don't know about it, it's hard for them to make that decision. Also, are they used to dealing with a business that's my age, meaning that I have a significant amount of experience because I've been doing this quite a while, so they don't need to be as handsy as they may be? Or I'm young in it and I need them to be a little bit more hands-on, or I need them to at least understand the nature of a scrappy business that is really getting off the ground and needing a different kind of support. And also, do they understand my physical demographics that I identify with? Are they understanding of that? And do they have folks in their portfolio that look like me? It's an important question to ask yourself and ask of the investors, or at least research on the investors as you're talking to, if you happen to get in a room where you can be firsthand with these people and talk to them and have a conversation and possibly even pitch your deck. Does the investment team represent my background or lived experience in any way? Can we relate? This is so critical, okay? Because if you do have an investor that's engaged in all the other areas that I discussed, but maybe doesn't really represent you or have a team makeup that represents you and your company, it can be hard to relate to that investor in a meaningful way where they'll understand some of the nuanced challenges that you're experiencing, particularly as a business owned by a person of color or a woman-owned business, where they just can't identify with that. And I'll tell you the truth, the majority of the industry, which you can probably assume, is white males that are in between the ages of 30, 45 on the level that is on the mid-level and in some cases even on the senior level, but they may not relate to a 25-year-old African-American woman or Latinx woman or Latina. They may not be able to relate to a group of friends that grew up together and have a great business, went to HBCU and now have a great company that's making pizzas, and they want to open pizza restaurants up all over the Southeast. This is a true story, and I'll put the link in one of the sessions later. But are they going to be able to identify with these kinds of businesses and understand where they come from and their background? Last thing is understanding that patient capital is more than a chronological timeline. Okay, so I work in the space of patient capital, and we extend equity into companies for 10 years and sometimes even longer, okay, with no current returns, meaning no money paid out to us as investors on an annual basis until that horizon that we identified at the beginning. But patient capital also can mean just an understanding of how times change and expectations can change. Some folks and some investors may be rigid to what you agreed to initially, and your company may not be able to produce that to no fault of your own. Maybe you're facing something like what we just experienced in the last 2 years. Maybe you're facing something worse that is impeding your ability to do business. But understanding that you're engaging with investors that are in it with you and their capital is in it with you, and they understand that times change and people change and industries change, and they are part of that ride. So those are the 5 top things that, as a person seeking capital, I think that you really need to understand before you get in a conversation with investors expecting something different without having really vetted whether or not these investors align with who you are and these key points that can ensure that you get capital that can be meaningful for your organization for a long time and really help you achieve the goals that you've outlined for yourself. Now, part of that trust is on you. So now that you know what your parameters are, here's what you have to do on your end for the investor. Deliver what you said as you said it, and over communicate. So that means that if you take on capital designed for a specific purpose, that every day you are intentionally utilizing those resources to meet that end. And as I said before about patient capital, if things change, the cadence of your communication with your investor is so fluid that they can almost anticipate the changes and there are never any surprises. So you have to over communicate with your investor, even if that's just a brief weekly digest or bi-weekly digest that you just send out saying, hey, here's what's going on. Here's the activity that we have, not necessarily specific to them because you may have multiple investors, but you just want them to understand what's happening in the company in real time, what your human capital is doing, what your social capital is doing, and what you're producing in a meaningful way. And that is key and essential to building trust between yourself and the investor, because the investor now understands what it is that you need from them, and you understand what you have to deliver for them. So I want this to be a conversation. I want to be able to answer questions in real time. I'm an individual that has raised a significant amount of capital for my purpose. My current fund is a $15 million fund, and I'm currently raising a fund that may likely reach $100 million, specifically to make investment in Black and Brown and Indigenous business owners throughout the Southeast to acquire real estate to operate their businesses in. So can we open it for Q&A, Antonio? Or maybe we can drop the questions in the chat. Come on, I know there's at least one question. We got a bunch of people in the room. I would love to engage you and have a dialogue. Go ahead, Corey. What's your question?
So my question is, in the process of acquiring funding, when you do not have the track record of profitability, how do you go about still securing investments?
That's a great question, Corey. So you're talking about for your small business?
Yes.
Right. So the best way that I can answer that is that you have to make sure that you come up with an extremely compelling concept, first of all. All right. And in some cases, you may be able to borrow capital from an individual or entity, but in most cases, you will not. So what I would encourage you to do is become a part of a local accelerator. There are a number of different entities that are in Winston-Salem that really nurture small business development this way, to at least produce a minimum viable product, an MVP of what your business is, what your business or service can do, and then reinvest whatever dollar amount you have. Maybe your minimum viable product is something that you can accomplish with $100, $250, to at least demonstrate what it is. If your resources don't allow you to do that or make that investment, maybe you're a part of an accelerator that can help couple investment with you in order to build that MVP and demonstrate it and communicate it and really ingrain yourself, whether you do it in Greensboro. I know, Corey, we talked earlier, you're based in Greensboro, or you do it in Winston-Salem. There are a number of entities in our entrepreneurial ecosystem that work with startup businesses, whether that be Launch Greensboro, whether that be Flywheel, whether that be the small business centers at GTCC and at Foresight Tech, that really help small business owners put the framework around their business so that they can, like Matt was saying earlier in the session tomorrow, communicate their business, particularly from a finance standpoint, where maybe I don't have capital today, but here is what I project that I can accomplish. And with minimal investment from myself and from a partner or an organization that can provide me low barrier capital in the way of grants or accelerators that support organizations that do that. So I'm going to, I have my link on here, but I'm going to drop my email in the chat.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to email you a host of organizations that are in our market that do that type of work.
Okay.
Thank you for your question.
For sure. Thank you. I do have another question. If no one else is going to ask a question, I can ask another one.
Real quick, ask another one.
Okay. I think I'm curious to know the strategy you used with onboarding new investors.
Well, you mean like how I acquired the investors?
Mixture of how you acquired them, the funnel from just the initial introduction to getting them confident enough to say, hey, you know what, I do want to make this investment.
It was a process. You know, my initial investor, we met summer of June 2018, and we didn't receive investment until February of 2020. It was a journey of building a rapport with the entity first, and then myself and my partners getting in the room and jamming on what we thought was the best and most viable opportunity for investment, vetting that with our peers and partners and potential partners, and then pitching it. And once we pitched it again and again and again until we created a groundswell of support that obviously pushed us over the edge to start receiving investment.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Corey.
For sure.
Any other questions? Love to bring somebody else to the stage. I can call people out. I see some good people in this room. Come on, Chuck Bird, Joe Rotundi. Carson, you can get back up here. Sue, I see you. Dr. Shante is coming to the stage. Oh, Dr. Shante, where'd you go? Additional questions?
Hey, how you doing, Wilson? So I'm gonna help you out with some of the Q&As right here.
Okay, are you helping me out? Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, so from Mary, she asks, I'm in the cold therapy market. There's not a ton of current investment, but the market is set to grow with the aging population. Where should I start finding investors?
Say the first part again, the what market?
The cold therapy market.
The cold therapy market with the aging population. Where should you start sourcing investors? Well, do you mind? Can I ask where is she located?
Mary, if you're in the chat, can you tell us where you're located? Hey, Dr. Shante.
Hey, Dr. Shante. So partly I would say that, you know, I would definitely take a look at the medical society in your market. The medical society are groups of physicians and businesses that are adjacent to the medical industry. And I think that is an excellent space to engage and begin to grow and develop your network. That way you may meet a chiropractor or some similar business that wouldn't mind either locating next to a facility that provides cold therapy. Many of those businesses particularly service the athletic market and have folks that have a need for that kind of support. Now, particularly for the elderly, what I'd also do is I would look at the network of assisted living facilities that are in the market, and I would identify if those facilities are adjacent to any foundations that either they operate or have been supported by, and see if potentially cold therapy would be something that they would be interested in being a part of. I would say this about investing and acquiring investors overall. It is always great to have a sponsor. A sponsor is an individual that can help make the connection and help make the introduction so that you can avoid cold calling an entity and trying to pitch your concept or your value that you're bringing to the table. If you can identify that, I think that it goes a long way. But going back to what I answered for Corey, don't anticipate it right away. If you are building a relationship, build a relationship with the right people that can put you in the right rooms and advocate for you. And over time, you may have an opportunity to receive investment to support your business. And that doesn't just go for cold therapy. That really goes for anybody that is seeking private equity. I hope I was able to answer your question.
I think you're speaking on mute.
I'm on mute now.
I should know better. Sorry. So the next question comes from Mona King. And the most investment in entrepreneur programs are targeting 40 and under. What efforts are being made to engage with older entrepreneurs with experience?
That's a great question, Mona, and glad you're in the room today. Hope you're doing well. I will say that disproportionately the resources that are in our market show up as only available to tech businesses or businesses owned by younger people, and something should be done about that, particularly because I'm not certain that those that are letting the opportunity for growth and investment are particularly targeting the age demographic. Just a disproportionate number of people in that age demo are responsive to those opportunities. And I would say that, many of those opportunities are based on tech-enabled opportunities. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about being sure that you're targeting resources that invest in opportunities like yours, making sure that you're targeting organizations that invest in an older entrepreneur. Like case in point, our business partners in equity, we don't invest in businesses that are younger than 2 years in age and have established revenues for multiple years. What that tends to lean toward is a more seasoned entrepreneur that has more establishment in their community and has been doing business for some time and just needs to go to the next level. Not particularly tech-enabled, interested in owning and acquiring real estate. And in most cases, the business owners that have done that have already purchased their first home. And given the average age of when people purchase their first home, those entrepreneurs tend to be older. So, I would just make sure that I'm looking for companies and entities that are interested in more than just buzz topics and high growth businesses. And generally those businesses tend to be those that are tech enabled, and all that capital is trying to chase a unicorn, knowing that, there are not many of them.
You're back on mute.
Sorry, guys. So Councilman's next. What are the specific nuances involved in raising money for real estate versus raising money to invest into startups? And it's a two-part question, but that's the first one.
Right. So for me, I did not choose to go the startup. Our team didn't choose to go the startup route. We were looking to do something very specific, and that was to fight commercial gentrification in markets that are predominantly represented by Black and brown populations, and to proliferate a more significant percentage of ownership of commercial property in those areas. So what I would say is that, we had to focus on folks that were interested in investment that was a little bit safer, because startups are a little bit risky, but our investments are backed up by real estate assets. We also had to focus on social impact investors and people that were willing to commit a significant amount of capital for something that may not yield them a very high return in terms of profits, but would yield a significant impact in the position of communities around the United States of America that are historically disinvested or disproportionately not invested in. So, we had to source that, we had to find that, and we focused on social capital versus just private capital that is in the marketplace. So that's what we did for real estate. I think the nuance with startup capital is that you have a number of businesses, venture capital funds that are not socially focused, but are monetarily focused and are sourcing the company that is really going to generate a significant amount of profits. And across the board, they spread those chips, hoping that one is going to advance and create a significant amount of profit for their business. I think there's more capital in the marketplace for that, less capital for social impact organizations, though we're seeing growth in the social impact space of venture funds, much like Equilibrium.
All right, and there was a second part. Says, how did you focus your approach to use the 5 key points of advice you shared with us?
How did I what?
How did you focus your approach to use the 5 key points of advice that you shared?
I chose those points because I've talked to a significant amount of business owners in my time. At one point in my career, I was talking to somewhere between 500 and 700 unique business owners a year. And I was listening to each of their stories and each of their approaches to me as the person sitting on the other side of the table that could potentially provide them capital. And these are the things that I think that the ones that were not successful were leaving out of their process of evaluation when they approached the door. So I think that, I wanted to put those messages out there, those questions or statements out there, so that when you approach the door of investment, when you meet the Dr. Shante Williams and you have built a relationship and a rapport with her, and she believes enough in your organization to say, hey, we're going to go into a room and there's going to be some different people in this room that may have interest in what you're doing, that you have top of mind these 5 simple statements, 5 simple questions to begin to evaluate, who do I have the best opportunity to receive capital from and could have the best relationship, best trusting relationship with that entity after I've used this evaluation. And I think that what creates skepticism is not knowing the right questions to ask on the part of the individual that's seeking capital. The benefit to acquiring capital is you have the opportunity to scale your business faster. The comfort level with doing that is based upon your awareness of who your investors are and their alignment with your purpose and mission as an individual in the company.
Okay, so we have a few more questions.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in. I have a question.
Go ahead, Doc.
So I love all 5 points, and I'm just curious, if you've done all these things and you're a business owner, how do you unravel, or what's the best approach if it's not working out between you and an investor? How would you suggest the startup or the person start having, or addressing that situation before things completely implode?
That's a great question. And about every 60 days at Partners in Equity, we do a new operating agreement with different entities that we're investing in. And I'm not talking about with the same entity, but as much as I have done that before, doing it now, it's just so in front of my mind that it is always important to think everything through in the beginning. Okay, because once you sign that documentation, you ever heard you only get what you negotiate? And a lot of times people think that the getting is just in the percentages and in the money, but a big portion of the getting is in your position in it. And position includes entry and exit. Okay, so what I would do going into an agreement is I would make sure that there were clauses in my agreement that could be enacted based upon the condition of the relationship. If there's a deterioration in the relationship, that we have a mechanism in place where everybody can safely exit the agreement without significant loss. But many times when we get into agreements, we don't even like the idea of it because we feel confined or we feel like it's going to be a conflict. So one thing that I want everybody to get really, really comfortable with, and this is really a beautiful statement from one of my business partners, that we think that when we're negotiating something, we don't want to have a tough conversation early. But the statement is, I don't have a problem with conflict. I have a problem with feeling conflicted. Okay. So while you're in a relationship, there is space for feeling conflicted if you do not have a resolution for the conflict. And it's better to go into an agreement making everything plain and thinking everything through and having difficult conversations in the beginning, so that if there's an opportunity for confliction, that you have a resolution for it in place. And that starts at the beginning of the relationship.
I love it.
So we have a few more. All right, I am going to pull up a question from Dr. Linda McCrae.
Great.
Any advice on business acquisition? I have been approached by another practice following the death of a founder with no will.
Wow. This is really a big issue. I just want to say, Black, brown people, work on your wills. Work on your wills. It's critical. We all have an appointment to leave this place. We don't know when it is, but much of our wealth and our position as a new majority community is not having that part of our business in place. So how would I approach, or my thoughts on acquiring businesses? I I don't know what your entire background is, or if the business that you're thinking about acquiring is falling into your background, but I believe in acquisition only when it is going to benefit what I'm currently doing, or my position in it is going to be extremely passive. I would also think about this: negotiate the price of the acquisition based on whether or not the family that you're acquiring the business from wants to maintain any level of equity in the business. If they're wanting to maintain a percentage of equity, then I would anticipate that my buy-in would be significantly less. But I would hold the majority of the equity, whatever that number is, whether it's 95% and 5%, 51% and 49%, whatever it looks like. I would be in the majority position and be able to make the decisions for the company for the most part. That would be my approach to it.
Great. So the next question is from Tony Barnes.
Tony Barnes.
Sorry, I lost it for a second. What would you advise to a small business owner who has an interested investor, but they lack the things outlined in the top 5 that you outlined?
I'd walk away. They lack the 5 things. Like they don't have those 5 things.
Yeah, that's what
all money is not good money. Walk away from the money. I started this by saying it's too much money out here to be in competition for the wrong dollar. Demonstrate some patience for yourself. It'll pay off in the long run.
Great. So we do have a few more questions, and we have a couple more, a little bit of time for those. Just wanted to, if you have any questions that you want to ask Wilson, you could throw them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that we'll grab them if we can, if time allows. All right. So the next one that I have here is from Joe Rotundi. Right. I work with entrepreneurs who don't identify as folks who pursue investors and are often intimidated by the idea. What would you say to encourage them to think big?
That's a great question, Joe. And I know exactly, and have engaged businesses that you work with, seen some of those folks walk away from opportunities. And, one thing that I would encourage, and this is just a little bit more tailored, guys, because I know Joe. And if you don't know Joe, he's a gem in the market for entrepreneurs in the space that he works in. But I would start at the beginning of their relationship with the Forge, of asking them, what do you want out of this? What is your expectation for your business to become? And I would, out of the gate, communicate to them what is achievable, identify how much capital they have, and if they don't have any, I would try to telegraph what is accomplishable without investment. And I think that begins to change the mindset of individuals. And for everybody listening, Joe operates the Forge in Greensboro that is a maker space. And people come there and utilize the equipment that they have to really design and create beautiful products. And art is really what it is. And when you're an artist, as Erica Badu said, you're sensitive about your shit. So you don't necessarily want to give up a lot of interest in it because it's a part of your heart that you've given up to create it. And what I would communicate to those artists are build the best product that you can in the marketplace, and don't be afraid to let it go. And let a portion of it go, because as you let it go and more people appreciate it, then the value of your work increases. I.e., take a painter that sells a piece for $1,000 today that's worth $20,000 2 years from now sells the piece in 2024 for $50,000. So you kind of got to think about the value that will be added by allowing someone else to come into your business and increase the value of your position based upon the association and the interest in your product. I hope I answered your question, Joe. If not, you can text me.
Great. All right. So we're going to go. I think everybody liked that Erykah Badu comment that you made. So the next one that we have here is from Robert Donnan. He says that I'm working with a Black-owned culture startup, Urbanime. It links brands like Foot Locker with Black and brown consumers through events or urban-themed comics. Needs money to sustain before seed stage. What are the next steps?
I think it's important for me to understand, have they had any success in connecting the businesses with the consumer? I think that to what Corey was saying really early on is about the track record. If you can demonstrate, some connectivity to the audience that you're planning to bring in front of these businesses, then you have a higher propensity to gain entry to the market in a meaningful way. What I think I would do if this were me in my business and that you were consulting, or if I was consulting the business, is I would try to secure one client, okay? I would try to secure one client that was aligned with what it is that I do, and I would beta what I'm trying to accomplish in a very meaningful way, in a very visible way, so that I can then take that and share that activity with other entities that need that support. And once I have some level of a groundswell of support for what services I'm offering, then I can communicate to investors, hey, this is a booming opportunity. In my beta, I was able to, connect this brand with this community. I earned $2,500 on that. And now I got 10 different entities that want to pay me $3,500 to do the same thing. And this thing is on its way this way. But I would create my whole strategy around just acquiring that first client that can allow me to demonstrate the viability of my service and my ability to execute on that service.
Great. So as of right now, I do not see if we have any other questions. We do have time for one more. But Wilson, do you have any, final remarks that you want to make?
Yeah, what I want to just share with everybody is that, time is not limitless, but you do have time to build your business, and what you do and what you leave on the cutting room floor is extremely important. The time you spend in the cutting room is important. I'm not telling you to overthink it, but I am telling you to prime yourself and prime your business for the opportunity to acquire capital. And that has a lot to do with identifying yourself with the right investor. And when you find the right investor, you all both can act with a level of trust that is meaningful and is replicable with more investors, because that one investor could just create the opportunity of a lifetime for you to demonstrate the viability of a business that will persist past the moment and into the future, and potentially either be acquired or continue to exist in the community for a significant period of time, executing on the promises of their business. So I appreciate this opportunity to share with you all. I appreciate so many people attending and allowing me to engage.
All right. Thank you again, Wilson, for your great session. For everyone that is watching the session, the main stage and the wrap up with Matt will be beginning in a couple of minutes. So I want to thank you all.
All right, folks. Wow. What a first day. I hope that you have found this incredibly valuable. I mean, when you think about all the conversations that we had, Cosum did an amazing job setting the tone for the conversations in terms of why this matters. Why does investing in Black and Brown entrepreneurs make the difference? And where does bias exist? And how did we get here? I want to thank Dr. Shante Williams, also Wilson Lester, Shane Burmalley, Terrell Turner for all of their insights during our breakout sessions. You now know why it's important to be an investor. You also have language to also decode and prepare you for these conversations as a founder. We also know how best to engage with investors if you are a founder and how that becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. Shane Burmalley just gave us some really important insight around how can investors disrupt the bias and start to reconfigure the process to be more accessible and open to entrepreneurs of color. I hope that you had an opportunity to network with some of the participants in our networking room. And I've also had an opportunity to take advantage of some of the resources in our expo. So I want to pause and again, want to do another pulse check before I talk about what's going to happen tomorrow. So there is a word cloud, and I want you to tell me when you think of inclusive investing, in one word, what does it do for our community? So, based off what you've heard today, what does it do for our community? So, I'll let you respond to that, and we'll take a look at some of the insights that you've already extracted from day one. In one word, what does inclusive investment do for the community? Definitely strengthen. Thank you, Sheridan. I want you to drop that into that word cloud function so that we can start to see some of the responses here. What you need to do is refresh your screen, and that word cloud option will appear on that right-hand panel with chat, polls, Q&A, and then you should see the option for the word cloud. So I want to give people just a chance to populate their responses. Okay. There we go. Already starting to see people share. Just take a look at some of the things that are coming through. Creates pathways, it builds wealth, it progresses the community, it renews and strengthens it. It really fuels this sense of abundance and collaboration. I love this idea of reviving communities. And it creates honesty and transparency for sure in the process. So I love these responses. I love it. So I want you to take this energy with you into the rest of the afternoon, and I want you to bring this with you tomorrow. So just to give you a preview of what you can expect, we're going to open tomorrow with a recap video of some of the things that were discussed today. Then we're going to share a video that really history of investing in Black businesses and what that looks like and what it means for us today. Terrell Turner is going to come back and give us part 2 of the F word. We're also going to have some representatives from banks talk a little bit about the role that they play in advancing entrepreneurship for entrepreneurs of color. We're also going to have some entrepreneurial support organizations represented and folks who are working in their various domains to build out an inclusive investing ecosystem. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Got a quick phone call. But basically, they're going to share what it means to build out an inclusive investing ecosystem and talk a little bit about the work that they're doing to do so. And then we're going to hear from some entrepreneurs. So people who are involved in the process and in journey right now, and they will share some of the challenges and some of the wins that they've experienced as they've grown and developed their business. After we conclude today, you will still have an opportunity to do some networking. So if folks want to linger and connect with people, feel free to do so. Again, you'll also have access to our expo. And as we wrap up for the day, I want to invite you to do a little bit of homework before we come back tomorrow. And so what I want you to do is I want you to reflect on all the things that you've absorbed today. And I want you to think about what is the action that you can take to apply this to the work that you do in this entrepreneurial space, whether it be as a founder, an investor, or an aspiring investor. How are you going to take action with what you've learned today? Okay. So really process and apply this information. That's going to help anchor it in your brain. Make sure that you walk away with some key learnings. So until then, we will see you tomorrow morning, and we'll continue this conversation. I hope that you have an amazing evening and that you're leaving here feeling empowered and inspired to take your support in your business to the next level. So thank you so much. And we'll see you tomorrow.